Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week I sit down with guests to talk about a Disney Plus offering. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like the show and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. Joining me this week, we are continuing our series that I'm lovingly calling That Hamilcast Plus show, I guess. To discuss Hamilton, we have Cameron Hawkins from DualShockers. How you doing, Cameron?
I'm ready to talk about Hamilton.
Ready to talk about Hamilton. So for real quick little introduction for anybody who doesn't already know you, and they should, but if anybody is foolish enough to really only ever listen to our stuff, where would people find you, or where would people know you from? Or tell us a little bit about yourself, Cameron.
So I write over at DualShockers.com. I have been featured on IGN, Inside Gaming, that nerdy site now.
There you go.
Among others, Kind of Funny Games Daily. I've also been on as well. And
You are
yeah,
the current reigning champion of the Per Schneider
Peer
Cup,
Schneider
right?
Cup. Yep, I'm the current reigning champion of the Peer Schneider Cup.
There you go.
And yeah, I just love to talk about video games, and I love film as well. So even though this, Hamilton's technically a musical, but this is a film as well, and I think it should be somewhat treated as such as in that sense. Yeah, I'm ready to have a fun chat.
Yeah, yeah, great. So let's dive right on in a little bit. Kind of tell me to kind of kick off. What is your history with Hamilton? Was this your first time seeing it now that it's on Disney Plus, or had you seen the show before? Have you listened to the music, all that stuff?
So I knew that Hamilton was a thing for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and the I started listening to hearing the music because my fiance would play it in the car. But I didn't really know like the context or anything like that, and so like
She
some of
was
the
just
music was,
picking and choosing some of the songs from the show,
yeah,
and
yeah, she was like she would play like My Shot a lot. She would play Satisfied a lot, Alexander Hamilton a lot.
mm-hmm.
But uh, you know, and so what happened was, when I was planning to go to PAX East, I thought like, how far is New York City from PAX East?
Okay.
And let's see if if I could like surprise her that like, hey, we're going to New York City before PAX East, and then I could surprise her and like, hey, we're gonna go see Hamilton. We'll go see Hamilton on Broadway. Um, Even though it's not the original cast, like still would be really really cool to see in person.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't really work out financially, so
Yeah, yeah. It's
uh,
probably still a little, or at least especially then before Broadway closed down, it's probably a little cost prohibitive still.
yeah, and not even that, just like going on that entire trip just didn't really work out. But still went to PAX East, and that was a fun time. And then I was when they announced that it was coming to Disney Plus, I was like, cool, this is great. I want to watch it for sure because I really like musicals. I just don't go out of my way to see them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or to go listen to the music. Like most musicals that people bring up or talk about, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I just haven't really looked into it. Um, so for me, like more recently, like Waitress, Dear Evan Hansen,
Yep.
I'm very much aware of those really big, uh, beloved musicals as well. Um, and then we watched the movie, and it was incredible. Like I get why it is the phenomenon that it is. Like, uh, I thought that you know, it had I had such high expectations, and those expectations were 100% met, like if not passed.
Mm-hmm.
With just how they do the stage presentation and things like that. There were last night, I think it was last night or the night before. Like I actually took the time to try and look up. I like watched like the Tony Award acceptance speeches because almost everyone that was nominated won a Tony, and those that didn't win outside of Philippa Sue, unfortunately, like they lost because someone else from Hamilton won
Yep.
instead.
Yep.
So it's just like it's incredible. And I would see kind of like, obviously it's a very small frame of reference, but like when they would show like best, like, oh, these are the nominations for best musical, and I would see like the production design and the choreography. I'm like, this is nothing compared to what Hamilton is. Like this, you know,
Hmm.
not to degrade on those musicals, because I'm sure they're great in their own right, but just like, you know, it's not just the music that makes Hamilton so great. It's the production design and the choreography and you know, the rotating floor and how they use that to execute certain scenes, and among many other things that I think that's what makes Hamilton like so great and so special.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's basically what my history with Hamilton, and as of to like right now, I've watched Hamilton 8 times. Like I've watched the movie 8 times.
Nice, excellent. That's
Yeah.
because one of my it's interesting because you're the first person I've really talked to that went in more or less dark on
Hmm.
the show. Like obviously, as you said, you'd heard some songs, but um, one of the things oftentimes people will ask me as somebody who like used to do theater a lot and that kind of thing. People would ask me a lot, should I listen to the show first before seeing it? And that was when it was like just on stage or something. And I'm one of those people that has argued that usually, yeah, you probably want to go and do a show and you'll experience it kind of fresh,
Right.
seeing it with the cast. In this case, I often encourage people to actually try and listen to the show beforehand because there's just so much there. It's so dense
Yeah.
that you're even knowing the show going into it, you're not going to get everything out the first time really experiencing it.
Yes.
And if you're going in having to also like figure out what they're saying on top of everything at the speed they're saying it and everything at the complexity of a lot of Lynn's rhymes and stuff,
Yeah.
you might be a little bit left behind. So I'm curious, for you, kind of on your first viewing, did you feel like you were lost a little bit, or is it structured in a way that you were along for the ride, even if you weren't catching every word here and there?
Mm, I don't think I was really lost, and that's mainly because when I was in school, I was actually a very big fan of history,
Mm-hmm.
and so a lot of the not a lot of the stuff, but I would say like a good amount to keep me uh, competent on what's going on. I knew because I already knew.
Okay.
Uh, so which, like with Alexander Hamilton and like the whole, oh, take the bullets out of your gun, like that type of stuff, and like, which I feel like maybe not a lot of people actually know about. Like I
Yeah.
already knew that was the thing when that happened during the show, and the Battle of Yorktown, and this stuff that we learned. But like I feel like for history more than any other subject, outside of the performing arts, because I was a musician. I've been a musician for over half my life at this point. Like I feel like history is the thing that I've retained the most, that from what I learned in school. So yeah, I didn't really feel that I was feeling the need to keep up. It does very much like go from one point to another, and like you just have to roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
But but I think that after watching it, even the second time, I don't think from a more historical standpoint there was anything that I missed.
Okay.
That I felt like, oh, I didn't notice this until it was more of like visuals and um those type of things that I didn't notice the first time.
Yeah, that's fair. It's interesting because I liken it to at this point, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is like I saw that movie 9 times in theaters before it like left theaters, and I've seen it many more times since. And every time I'll still see little things, little new things, and it's very much for me the same with Hamilton, where like yeah, I haven't watched it, I don't think 8 times since it's been on Disney Plus, but I've had it on. I've watched it actively like 3 or 4 times, and I've had it on the background probably another couple times while I've worked on other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And there'll still be like the there are so many layers to the show that I'll still definitely hear like little themes or little motifs that are kind of like echoed or repeated or twisted, and it's just fun like getting those extra little like new experiences, realizing those new things, connecting the dots each time, I think. I'm sure you've probably had a similar experience there.
Yeah, like since after the first like few times that we watched it, my fiance would be Celia would just be like, the conversation would be like, okay, what's your favorite song?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what's your favorite performance? Okay, what's your favorite choreography? Which song has the best choreography to you? Oh, which one has the best stage presence to you? Like all these different things that I don't feel like that a lot of musicals you can have that question and be like, there's so many options to
Yeah.
choose from. Um, cause there's just so much to this musical, and it's my opinions on certain things are like ever changing. Like what my favorite. I think my favorite song is still has been the same throughout my viewings, but I think that when we were kind of going back to the should you listen to the music first or should you just watch the show um and listen to the music at the same time for the first time. uh I kind of think that the music is great for what it is, um in general, especially compared to most musicals.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that I think that you should try and watch the production like in its entirety, because another thing that I personally think, based off of like listening to the entire original like Broadway cast soundtrack compared to the movies performances, when it comes to the singing specifically, I think the movie is better than the original soundtrack. Um, in certain ways that the actors execute certain parts of the songs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Uh, so, but I mean, that in no way like tarnishes the original soundtrack. I just think that, especially now that it's available to you, uh, just watch the show and get the music at the same time, because then, again, because like when I didn't watch when I haven't before I watched the show, Celia would play the music in the car, and I was like, okay, this is a good song, but I don't get the context. I don't really understand. Like,
Yeah.
I knew that My Shot was like kind of like the big song, as well as like The Room Where It Happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those were like the two faces, I guess, of sorts for the musical. And but I just didn't really click with me. But now that like I know the context and I've seen it in action, like Hamilton's all I've been listening to for the past week.
Yeah.
Whenever we're in the car, that's what we're playing. Like that's what we're singing and all that jazz.
Yeah, and I will say, like it's not normally a recommendation I would make, but with Hamilton in particular, because almost the entire show is on the album, save one notable number. It is one of those things where, like, if you listen to the album start to finish, you're gonna get pretty much the entire context of the show and almost the entire show in itself. You're not seeing it on stage, and you're not seeing how it's been visually represented, but you're getting the story that's there. Very much in the way that, like, I was first introduced to Les Mis through like I want to say it was like a 25th anniversary special or something that was like, it was pretty much the same thing where it was like the whole show instead of just like the numbers, because Les Mis is another one that is sung through pretty much the entire time. So
Yeah.
but yeah, it's cool getting that different perspective, and also the idea of like you thinking that the numbers are executed better on stage in this version, which certainly makes more sense compared to being in a studio with headphones on, just kind of like belting out the songs as you can. But yeah.
Absolutely.
So we'll dive into a little bit more of your impressions here in a little bit, but I want to just quickly go through some of kind of our general little segments here. I'm going to skip over history lesson and the roll call because I've done that in 2 prior episodes. So if you want to know kind of the when this came out context and who's in it, you can check out the episodes with Logan or Cameron Abbott. We'll dive into a couple little trivia bits here. One that I'm I'm curious, or I guess not curious, but like, were you aware of the background on this? That originally it was scheduled for theatrical release next year, October 21st of 2021, and Disney basically paid like $75 million to distribute the thing. But then because of all the COVID stuff, they kicked that up basically 15 months and said, we're going to release it on Disney Plus, to show that the arts are still vital, since nobody can go see stuff on Broadway or on touring productions or in the West End. So were you aware of kind of like you were eventually going to be able to see it in theaters?
Yeah, I did know that because when it said it was coming out on July 3rd, I was just like, isn't it supposed to come out sometime next year? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's I'm very happy that that's the case, and I totally can see that once things eventually get back to what you can define normal, Disney will be like, hey, this is coming out for like a 2-week release in theaters, and I will 100% pay money to see that in a movie theater.
Yeah,
absolutely. That is shut up and take my money.
That's definitely like so as somebody who I think probably is a little more active in going and seeing shows and musicals, I will often see because they'll do this kind of thing for a lot of the bigger Broadway shows. Most recently, I saw a production of Kinky Boots that had been filmed and was shown at like a local movie theater, and that was basically how I first got to see that show. Another one that you can see on Disney Plus is Newsies, that they filmed kind of the Broadway version of the show. So it's pretty cool, and I guarantee it'll be something that, like, it'll probably be like a 4th of July kind of tradition that Disney will like invite theaters to go out and do it, if they don't have like an Avengers level movie that they're trying to really drive traffic towards. But yeah, it's and I lost my train of thought here. I was hoping that that this, because I know that they did Newsies, and I didn't know about the Kinky Boots thing. I've heard of Kinky Boots again. I hear about these things. I just don't take the time to look into them. But I hope that this is kind of I don't want to say a wake up call, but more of a like exclamation point for all studios and distributors to be like, hey, we should like film these popular Broadway musicals and then release them as movies, because then it'll give the people ability to see these movies with the original cast. Yeah.
And I don't think that's a detriment specifically to the casts that follow, but because like on Kind of Funny when they did Hamilton review, like Yusuf said like, Lin-Manuel Miranda is not was not Hamilton to him.
Yeah.
And I get that, and so the experiences are different, but I just feel like when the soundtrack's release and it's just like, oh, this is the original cast, it still is something different that is still just kind of like the core. That is where people see as the cast of this musical. You know what I mean? Like for example, like Jordan Fisher is going to be the next Evan Hansen for Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway, which my fiance is a fan of his. But but if they were to film that and it go out, I would want it to be Ben Platt and the original cast. Even though like I'm sure Jordan Fisher, I've heard him sing, he's a great singer.
Yeah.
It's just it's just like having that original cast, the cast that the musical is known for, is why I would like that if they did do that, it would be the original cast for like Dear Evan Hansen or Waitress or like all these other well-known recent musicals.
Yeah, I mean, like even Rent, when they finally filmed Rent, 15 years after it had debuted, they brought back most of the original cast to come and play a lot of those characters. And it is, it's in part great and kind of like an honor for the original cast to kind of be immortalized with those performances. And to be fair, like they're the ones that put in the legwork. Some of these people had been working on Hamilton in workshop productions on the show for years before it eventually made it off Broadway and then on Broadway. So like they've been creating the character as much as anybody else involved in the process, and then anybody who kind of picks up that role and kind of takes it from there, they're they'll bring their own flavor to it, but a lot of the legwork and the groundwork of the performance they're giving is still kind of from whoever kind of really originated the role. One of the rare kind of examples in this show is the fact that Brian Darcy James was the original King George when the show was being workshopped, and then in like off-Broadway productions. And then I don't remember the details of why he had to end up stepping away, but Jonathan Groff came in and played King George for when it made it to Broadway, and so he gets immortalized here. But even here, like one of the other little trivia things that I have, and I might have already covered this on one of the other shows, is
Jonathan Groff was already gone, right?
Yeah, he had already left the show at that point, but they Rory O'Malley, who was playing King George, graciously kind of stepped aside so he could come back in and play it, and that's why he gets kind of a special thanks in the credits of this. And there's a fun little thing that you can I know you can look into and see some of the examples of this. For King George, they always do this little like show ritual of a coronation ceremony where like the previous King George will come in and kind of like dub the new person King George.
Really?
So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
there's one you can find definitely on YouTube as part of the Ham for Ham series of videos that they did. I don't remember which King George it was, but like when Jonathan Groff came in, for example, Brian Darcy James kind of dubbed him King George the Second, and then after him, I think it was Rory O'Malley, or it might have been I forget, Andrew Rannells, who also was in Book of Mormon on Broadway. Like one of them is King George the Third, and then there's a King George the Third, the Fourth, and they kind of like carry that on, and they do a little thing on set where they'll take Washington's sword or something like that, and they'll kind of like knight them and stuff like that. It's a fun little like just cast ceremony ritual thing that they do in for that role, because it's just a fun, like completely self-contained role really from everything else in the show.
And speaking of Book of Mormon, God, would I like kill like that's probably like the musical that I want to see. I want to see that musical so bad. So I really hope that, I don't know, Matt Stone, Trey Parker, if you're listening to this, please get the original cast back together. It hasn't been too long, and let's get it done. You know what I mean? 'Cause,
and that's for that kind of conversation, I was having a chat with somebody on over Twitter. It's pretty common, especially for like the big shows, that they will have some version of the musical filmed, largely for like archival purposes or promotional purposes. You can basically pull out clips and stuff. You don't always get like the treatment that this one got, which was shot over 3 days. They shot it with live crowds, and then they kind of did like special like close-up shots and inserts and stuff like that with the cast. And so for something like Book of Mormon, there's something out there that exists. It's just a matter of like, is it something they could put out there and get widely received? Like I said, if something like Kinky Boots has it, I know something like Book of Mormon has it, or Hades Town is another one that people are clamoring for right now. And Book of Mormon or Hades Town, I could easily see like HBO Max picking up and basically saying, yeah, let's go ahead and like take that and put it on our thing. Book of Mormon in particular, I think I shouted out as like, especially with South Park on it right now on HBO Max, like you could easily use that as a selling point of like, yeah, you saw Hamilton, well, come see Book of Mormon, come see what the minds behind South Park did with a musical.
Right.
So
I don't have HBO Max right now, but if that was announced, I would 100% get a subscription just to watch that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think studios, if they have kind of an ear to the ground, will keep an eye on, for at least for the big Broadway shows, and the big Broadway producers will be wanting to kind of do more of this kind of film stuff, so they can sell it off to to like a streaming service for distribution or something like that. So it wouldn't surprise me. It just comes down to right now, if we won't get any unless they've really already been done, because obviously with Broadway closed, you're not going to get the cast of Hades Town to sit down and do a production of the show just for filming right now. But hopefully when they come back, we can get stuff like that. So yeah, I want to throw it to you because you mentioned before we started recording that you've been doing a lot of like research and finding little fun facts and tidbits. Do you have any others you want to share?
You said some of them. Oh God, like now I'm drawing a blank on them. Oh man. I was so well. I was gonna say I did watch. I like went on YouTube and I like tried to find all the curtain calls
Mm-hmm.
for the main cast.
Yep.
I didn't find any for Jonathan Groff. I didn't find anything for Oak, who plays
Hercules.
Hercules,
Yep.
and James Madison.
Yep.
Didn't find that one. Didn't find the one for Jasmine, who plays Peggy and Maria. But everyone else, I think I gotta see the curtain calls for. Leslie, Lynn, and Philippa did their final shows together,
Mm-hmm.
and then like this is what surprised me. Like Renee, who plays Angelica, she was there for a long time.
Yeah.
Her and the only person that I think that out of the original cast that was there longer than her was Anthony Ramos.
Mm.
Ramos. He was, I think, was the last original cast member that outside of the ensemble, because I don't know about them.
Yep.
That stayed for the Broadway. So fun facts. So with Jonathan Groff, like the way he walks in You'll Be Back.
Yep.
So the reason he walks like that is because of the crown.
Yep.
Because the crown is super heavy, and he uses it to balance himself, which is so great because it makes the performance even better,
Mm-hmm.
as well, which is just so great. I'm trying to think about what else I've found. I saw there's so much, and I just completely I'm spacing on it. If I think about them,
yeah, it's perfectly fine.
If I think about it later, I'll bring it up.
Yeah, it's the one of the big things about this production this filming is they did it basically before most of the rest of the cast, their contracts were coming up, because a lot of times like you'll be signed to a show for a set of time, and then some people will go ahead and renew, but other people want to go out and do other creative ventures. I know Philippa Sue, for example, after this went and did Amelie on Broadway.
Yeah.
So it was like, especially a show like this where you're doing it 8 times a week. If you do that for a year, you might end up being kind of a little exhausted by it. It's rare that you're going to find people that especially like creative artists, that don't want to go out and try and like do something else, do something new. And especially if you have like the cash of Hamilton behind you, you can basically be like a lot of people were able to go out and basically like do dream projects or kind of work on stuff like that. Obviously, like Daveed Diggs is now being able to like write and make movies like Blind Spotting and stuff.
Blind Spotting is a masterpiece for me, so
yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of Blind Spotting, I didn't know that Jasmine Jones was a part of the original cast of Hamilton, because I was watching, and I saw her as like when it does that first close up on her when during the Schuyler Sisters, I literally like leaned forward. I was like, is that the wife from Blind Spot? I was like, it makes so much sense now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because she's great in that movie too. So yeah, that was a really cool thing that I learned when I watched it the very first time. But yeah, yeah,
I haven't
kind of,
just on her. I haven't delved into this, but I've seen I've seen it mentioned, and I've seen like videos of the proposal. But I believe Anthony Ramos and Jasmine Cephas Jones are engaged or married.
Engaged. Yes, they're engaged.
So yeah, so there's another like little fun Hamilton tie-in. Peggy is Philip's aunt, and also engaged to him. Yeah.
So there is actually, I don't have the examples to kind of like explain this fun fact that I learned. And I do want to go back on kind of like where the cast went after this, because I found something interesting I want to talk about. But one of the ensemble members is apparently supposed to like signify death.
Yeah, we talked about that on Logan's episode, on the first episode we talked about. Yeah, the girl who plays the bullet serves as the omen of death, and you see it kind of play out early on so she's the first person killed in the show, basically. At the end of You'll Be Back, is how that one plays out. So yeah, at the end of You'll Be Back happens. She's killed for like treason or aiding a or whatever is the story plot like for it. And from then on, she becomes Death. So she has a moment. When there's a moment, I don't remember which song it is, but Hamilton's like sitting at a desk writing. I think it's probably when he's writing for the guns and everything. She shoots and the bullet like narrowly misses him, but then she kills a British soldier with Lawrence, and then Lawrence is the next to die. Like she shakes hands with Lawrence. Lawrence is the next to die.
Yes.
Smart. And then one of the other big moments is when Philip later is looking for George Eaker. She's the one that tells him where to find him. And the little commentary and in this little trivia thing that I saw floating around is he's obviously flirting with her and the other girl in that scene, and so he's very literally flirting with death in that moment.
Yeah, flirting with death. Yeah.
So yeah,
so great. Such a great scene.
Yeah. So like, and that's another thing. Like I didn't know that until after this came out and until like it was being shared. And one of the things I loved in one of the interviews I saw was Lin-Manuel Miranda basically talking about the idea that like more people were going to see this opening weekend on Disney Plus than had seen it in the entirety of its 5-year run on Broadway, in tours, all that stuff. Like just the like you lose sense of that scale of, yeah, you can only pack in a few hundred people per performance on Broadway or something like that. But you know, putting this in the homes of millions of people suddenly who have been hearing about this thing for years, you're going to suddenly get a ton of people kind of exposed to it and seeing things that were there or you know, subtle things. Like one of the things I didn't catch until watching it for the first time is in the final duel, the same person who plays Charles Lee in 10 Duel Commandments is Burr's second. So it's like a switching of the roles between those two characters, because Burr was Charles Lee's second in that first one. So like even little things like that, I'm like, oh, I appreciate that they, like, I guarantee that was a deliberate choice that somebody was making to when you've got like a cast of 10 or 12 ensemble members, you're going to pick the one that has the most thematic resonance with what else we've seen. So yeah, I love little moments like that. And yeah, that Angel of Death one is just a really cool little nugget.
Yeah, and there are two other things. One of them's not really a fun fact, but I think it's just something that I think that people may not notice until it's brought up, because it wasn't really until it was brought up to me I was like, oh my god, this is just absolute genius.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I kind of want to talk about like some of the historical inaccuracies.
Okay,
that
yeah.
Hamilton has.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just interesting, and I think that the changes that they made don't in any way really tarnish the quality of the musical.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more of hey, this like it's trying to it doesn't. There are historical reasons that don't really affect what they're doing right now. Like Angelica and the Schuyler sisters, like they had like 5 brothers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they
Yep.
and then Aaron Burr was not Lee's second hand man and during that duel, like which I find interesting. But the thing that I thought was really cool is so in my opinion, the two like the song that like signifies the character for Hamilton is My Shot, and then the one for Burr is Wait For It.
Yep.
And that's kind of like also very much kind of like the signifying like, oh, you gotta make moves or you're not gonna go anywhere, and then like Burr's like he's basically complicit on everything political. He's just neutral. He doesn't want to speak his opinions. And then when it comes to like the duel, the roles reverse. Like Hamilton waits, he doesn't shoot, and then Burr takes his shot, and it's just like that's so cool. It's so cool.
Hamilton throws away his shot he
throws away his shot.
There's a great I'll include it in the in the description for this episode. There's a great YouTube video, like video essay I watched a couple years ago that I've been rewatching a lot this week. Basically about the motifs of Hamilton, and it dives into specifically like Wait For It and how Wait For It is used throughout the show to just color Burr with so many different emotions. I'll definitely share it with you when we're done recording here. Recommend it. Because I also listened to the kind of funny kind of reaction to it, and Tim reached out, or he put out there, he's like, I would love any video essays that you guys can send my way. And I was like, oh, here's one that I remembered from a couple years ago that I thought was really like resonant and profound and stuff. And so I dug that up and shared it on Twitter a couple days ago. So I'll send it your way as well. Because it goes into a lot of that stuff of very much like my shot is Hamilton at his core, he acts, and Burr is Wait For It at his core, and he waits, and he doesn't really turn until Room Where It Happens, and that's where he decides he's going to start acting, and then Hamilton like completely shoots down what Burr's trying to do there, and so you get like at the end of their duel, you get that role reversal of Burr acting, and then Hamilton throwing away his shot and waiting kind of effectively. So just a great like twist on it. One other one that I will share with you. It's a fun little one. I've enjoyed sharing this, so people who've listened may have heard it before. But if you haven't caught it already, in the opening number, Alexander Hamilton, at the end of the number, they kind of have those little breakout moments where Anthony Ramos, for example, says, "Me, I died for him," and that's a reference to both him as Lawrence as well as him as Philip. Yep. You have the women all saying, "Me, I loved him," and on a first viewing, you're thinking, wait, like Peggy doesn't love him, but when you realize that it's Mariah Reynolds, it makes sense. And then "Me, I fought with him" is both Lafayette and Hercules Mulligan saying, "I fought alongside him," as well as Jefferson and Madison saying, "I fought against him" in the second act. So very, again, deliberate choices in how they use double casting in the show, and I just love that like that's one of my favorite little like layered in, like to the extreme kind of moments. That's like right from the gate they kind of tell you what the show's about and what the show's going to be about, and just fun little trivia fun facts like that. So let's dive in, and if more come up as the show kind of, or as this show continues, feel free to pepper in anything else you recall.
But there's one thing that I still don't know the reason behind it, that I want to find out, and I don't know if you might know it. Okay. Why is it that Burr is the only one who doesn't wear white during Alexander Hamilton?
Ooh, I don't. Yeah.
Everyone's wearing white, even Hamilton, until he changes later. But like he starts in white, but then Burr is in purple, and I'm like, why is that? Is there an actual significant a significance behind that, or is it just because the song, it goes straight into Aaron Burr, sir, and he doesn't have time to change. He doesn't have time to do something, to go off stage and change out of his white to purple.
Yeah, from a very practical stance, I'm sure that's probably a role. But I would also say that, from a thematic, I don't know the specific answer. I'm sure you could, the costume designer could speak more eloquently to that. But from a thematic stance, because now I'm trying to think, is he's also in black at the end of the show, right? When everybody's in white for the curtain call and everything. So it strikes me as while the show is named after Hamilton, it's very much Burr's show, and that's one more element that I think helps set him apart as a character, because we're getting most of the story told from his perspective, and then he's the one who has one of the most dynamic arcs over the course of the show, going from waiting for it to seizing what he wants to being ruined because of seizing what he wants. So it helps kind of plant in the mind that, hey, this is really the character to look out for in this show. This is we're gonna make him kind of stand out among the crowd right from the off, so that you identify with him a little bit more, because he's not just one of the masses in kind of the more neutral garb. and that I think carries throughout the show to all the way to the end point. So like you want to be on the journey with Burr as much as anything in this show.
Yeah, maybe in the sense of like he is the narrator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating question. I'm sure. Again, I'm like there's probably some interview and some like the technical theater costuming guide that may go into that more specifically. One of the things I often kind of touch on in this, and where I pull some of my trivia from, is there's a great book out there called Hamilton: The Revolution that is basically part behind the scenes, like the making of Hamilton, and they have like chapters dedicated to the costuming choices, and the like one of the fascinating costuming choices on that vein is they made a conscious decision that basically from the neck down is going to be very like period and historically, influenced and accurate kind of stuff, but then from the neck up and basically everybody's hairstyles, that's very much modern sensibility, and they didn't really care about making any of that historic. And that was kind of the fitting in with the theme that they kind of built the show around, of telling America's past through America's today and through America's future, through the lens of the present. But yeah, Hamilton: The Revolution has chapters dedicated to kind of the costuming and the set and all sorts of those little elements. So definitely I recommend you checking it out and picking it up, because the other half of it is basically liners notes for the album and for all the songs, as well as Lin-Manuel Miranda kind of includes like little footnotes. So it'll be like this, he'll kind of add on something to a line, basically say like, this is where I was at when I came up with this line, or this is the specific hip hop reference that I'm making, in this moment, like only 19, but my mind is older kind of thing, and stuff like that. Or here's the specific musical theater song or number or show that I'm referencing when I pull in, this line of dialogue or something like that. So, it's a fascinating kind of like read, and then also just full of fun facts and trivia and history about Hamilton. Another one that I love pulling in there, and one of the things that I think is interesting, because you mentioned Renee Elise Goldsberry basically stayed with the show as one of the longest kind of cast members, is she, and you may have seen this in like an interview or something like that, she almost didn't go to the audition. Like she just wasn't really feeling it, but she like her husband talked her into it, I think, and so she ended up going and obviously falling in love with the role of Angelica. And that's like a fun little like anecdote that's kind of detailed in the book as well. So yeah, definitely check that out.
That's actually, I was gonna say that's actually a really fun thing about Leslie Odom Jr. as well. Like when he went to the Hamilton mixtape thing, which I really don't know what is that like. Was that like the off Broadway? Was that like the auditions of sorts? Or
so I don't know. One of the other things that I would encourage you to check out if you haven't seen it already is Hamilton originally wasn't going to be a play. Like, you can go all the way back to 2009, and Lin-Manuel Miranda was invited to the White House, like arts, like poetry and arts kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He was invited off of his success from In the Heights. He was very much kind of like a rising voice in the art scene, and he performs Alexander Hamilton at that thing in 2009. And he kind of does this whole intro about it being like he was working on a concept album based off of somebody that he thinks of as like the personification of hip hop, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. And he gets laughs, and Obama and Barack Obama and Michelle are laughing, and it's played as a joke. But he basically talks about that the original intent was he was inspired after reading the book by Ron Chernow and was going to do like he wasn't necessarily looking to dive into another play right off of In the Heights. So he was going to do like a hip hop mix album, a mixtape basically. So it was going to be originally a concept album that, as he put more thought into it and more work behind it, started taking the shape naturally of a story and a play. And so what Leslie Odom Jr. is talking about there is, before it was called Hamilton, an American Musical, it was the Hamilton Mixtape, and it was a looser series of songs that were telling the story, but it didn't have like the full final version. So it was basically a pre-workshop to like the off-Broadway run or stuff like that, because a lot of times when creating new theater, you'll have like repeated staged readings. So you're putting something together and you bring in actors to do the show so that the people behind it can see what's working, what isn't working, what needs to be tweaked, that you just can't necessarily see in your head or when you're just listening to the music or something like that. So Leslie Odom Jr., yeah, got to see like a workshop version of an early production, effectively, of Hamilton, that then he kind of got involved with later.
Yeah, apparently he said that he says recently, like when they were doing like kind of like the press tour, quote unquote, for this movie, that he was like he got one of the last seats.
Yeah.
For the show too, so he barely got it.
Yeah, because those things will typically be like very, very like small friends and family gatherings, or it'll be like, you know, like I don't know the specifics about that one, but a lot of times it'll be like, hey, we're renting out a 99 seat theater to do this thing, so we're gonna bring in a handful of people. We're gonna bring in some VIPs because we're also trying to like sell the show and get financing for it and that kind of thing. But then you'll also bring in potential collaborators or something like that. So yeah, he was one of the last people to get a seat for it.
Yeah, I just thought that was a fun fact. And then and yeah, but I wanted to go back to Renee Goldberry really quick because I want to talk about her. Like another reason why apparently she stayed so long on the show is just like she was not getting offered any work. Like she said like I think from what my fiance told me, she said publicly like that no one's really wanted to work with her. And I like I'm curious as to why that is, but I also think I have theories because there's this kind of idea, especially in the film industry, that like when you win a prestigious award like that, it either like jumpstarts your career or it completely kills your career. And like when Matthew McConaughey won his Oscar, like next film he was in was Interstellar, like you know what I mean?
The reconnaissance, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But then there's other actors that they win their Oscar and then they just kind of fall off. You don't see them again. Kind of similar to like I think Eddie Redmayne, like he granted he's in Fantastic Beasts, but like I mean those films aren't that great.
Yeah.
And his like I think his filmography after that wasn't very good after he won for The Theory of Everything, which he should not have won, by the way.
So some of what you're hitting on there is like the whole like the political nature and the like oftentimes pay for play nature of awards doesn't necessarily equate to like who people think is really the most talented, because Eddie Redmayne is like one of those especially actors who's like all over the place. Like he can be great and he can also be god awful and terrible. Go ahead.
I'm also curious just because it might be a thing like where people might see Renee as Angelica, because that is definitely a thing that people do in general, and like Angelica is kind of rude throughout the movie, throughout the play, and the musical, and so it kind of might bring this viewpoint to the people that would want to cast her for something that like, oh, but isn't she kind of rude, or isn't she kind of, and I just think that's a little ridiculous, but I just find it curious because yeah, like she's an incredible singer, like she's an incredible actress, like I don't know, I just found that really fascinating to learn that. I think it was like yesterday or the day before that I learned that like that was a big reason as to why she was on the Broadway cast for so long.
Yeah, there's I mean there are a number of factors at play there, I'm sure, and I don't know the specifics of her case really, but I do know that there are like examples of kind of like that you kind of mentioned, like there are people who have a hard time finding work or finding success in a thing after they become so specifically tied to one other thing. It depending on who they end up trying to work for, it might be used as like a selling point. Like I know a lot of times I'll see touring productions come through that'll have like guest stars. Like I remember Sweet Charity, I want to say, a show that's not great, but like it was touring through, and the big selling point was oh shoot, I just blanked on her name. The girl from Anchorman and Married with Children. Yes, yeah, Christina Applegate. Like she was I think billed as like the like she's starring in Sweet Charity, so come see her on tour. And it was basically like they use them as the selling point for a show that they might not otherwise get to do. So like that's one side of things. In I mean really anybody from Hamilton's case, Hamilton, one of the obviously Hamilton's like big things is the fact that it is such a cast centered around people of color, which is significantly unheard of on Broadway outside of like shows that are built around that, being like The Color Purple or something like that. So there probably just weren't a lot of other roles for strong black women characters necessarily around that time. I don't know the specifics. I don't know what was going on Broadway around that time to know if there would have been any other roles. But then there are. It is a mixed bag because there are people like Matthew Broderick who did a record breaking run as the producers, which he admittedly was getting to do because of his Matthew Broderick fame. Am I thinking right? Yeah. But then he's gone on to do a number of other things in part because he's a draw that is a mainstream draw, whereas Renee Goldsberry might not have been a mainstream draw outside of like the theater scene where people were recognizing her and knowing her.
That's fair.
There is like and obviously not knowing, like I don't imagine it would be like a personality conflict. I don't imagine it would be people like you said, like looking at her as the character and saying like, oh, I don't want to risk working with her. Maybe she's difficult to work with, because theater, much like, the games industry, is a very like intimate and familiar setting. So everybody at those theaters knows, who to work with and who not to work with. And so I don't imagine it was that. They would know the difference between the character she's playing and the person that she is.
I wasn't particularly saying for theater work, just I was
thinking, but for film,
also film and even television, because Daveed Diggs, despite Daveed Diggs, like he was in a music group and things like that before Hamilton, he took off, like he flew up. But I also think that just both on and off screen, he was a very charismatic, charming person. So yeah. I mean, which again, like, is kind of like what I was while I was going back to seeing Renee as Angelica example. Because Daveed Diggs, like, even though he is Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson's kind of an asshole, he does it in a very charming way.
Yeah.
And in a really funny way. So like, because Daveed Diggs, like outside of Lin-Manuel, and even then I think there's an argument, it has had the most success since after Hamilton.
Yeah. It's also an interesting read on Angelica in general, that like she's a more ruthless or kind of like less compelling character or something, and that's not what you're saying, but like that she's a meaner character, I guess, because I read Angelica very differently. I read her as like and again, it's another thing to your historical inaccuracies or whatever. It's not known, like there's no like evidence that there was a romantic sense between those two characters. It's more something that was fabricated for the drama of the play. But like I look at that character and I think it's a compelling, unrequited love kind of character who, above anything, will look out for her sister, which is a very admirable trait. And to the fact that like the harshest she is, I would say, in the show is when she's being harsh to Hamilton for having an affair with her sister, against her sister, kind of thing.
Maybe rude wasn't the right term. More like she just has a very stone surface to her. You know what I mean? Like she. In that sense, which isn't in any way a bad thing, especially being a woman during that time. It was just, again, just kind of like the type of, because I agree with you, like she was very much like cared about her sisters more than she cared about her own happiness. But I just think that like for some people, again, similar to kind of like this Laura Bailey, like Abby stuff, like you play this character, you are this character, like that that mentality. But I just thought it was a fascinating thing that I learned, and I hope that she gets work soon because she seems very nice, and she's obviously very talented.
Yeah, there's you mentioned in the crossing over into like TV and film, that is a significantly larger hurdle for a lot of people to kind of bridge that gap. It's one of the, like, especially now that like Law and Order is off, like, because Law and Order, for all of its whatever, and all of its different iterations, like one of the biggest things Law and Order did was hire Broadway actors to come in and play a lot of the small bits and talent and stuff, and it was them getting their biggest things. I remember seeing Spamalot on Broadway back in 2010, and one of my favorite little like bios in the credits was somebody who basically was like, I have never been in Law and Order, which worked for the Spamalot and the comedy of it, but like it highlighted to me like, oh yeah, like a lot of these people in all their credits they see like TV, Law and Order, or CSI or something like that. There and that, like, there is a significant difference between theater acting, where you're trying to perform for like the back of the house, versus film acting, which is a very like closer style, and not everybody can do it or can do it well, and let alone again to speak to like the problems culturally and historically in Hollywood and Broadway in casting roles of color. That's not ground that I can really walk, but I've seen and I've read enough and I know enough just about the industry to know that it has been a significant issue. So I can see that kind of playing a factor in all this as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting just because of how much of a phenomenon
Mm-hmm.
Hamilton is, that you think that, like, oh man, all these main cast members are gonna like do well after.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I found it relatively fascinating, because there are other members of the cast that, as far as I know, haven't gotten, like, I haven't seen them in anything else. Like, I haven't
Yeah.
seen Oak in anything else. I know
Yeah.
Anthony Ramos is going to be in the Heights movie,
Mm-hmm.
which is cool. So it was just like one thing. It's like, oh man, like, she won the Tony Award, and like but she hasn't really done anything else since. And I don't know. I just like I hope that she can find something new soon.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I want all these people to have like all the success
Yeah.
in the world. I just like it's. I mean, you like we have the term one hit wonders in music as an example. Like, they can be at the top of the world, and then just completely unheard of the next day. It's the same in theater. It's the same in movie, TV. It's rare that you see it maybe to this extent, but it happens as well out there, all the time. But yeah, I'll definitely look into kind of a little bit more of her story and see if I can kind of
Yeah, I
glean
didn't look
anything else
into
out of it.
I didn't look into her history at all, or anything about like what she did before or any of that stuff. So but
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So kind of like we actually have kind of like talked about this a little bit through this conversation, because one of the things I've been asking a lot of times on this show, we'll ask, when we watch, an old Disney Channel original movie or something like that, we'll ask, how does it hold up? And I'm curious for you, in terms of kind of the conversation of 2020, especially amidst all the kind of the recontextualization of historical figures and stuff that we're dealing with right now, and obviously Black Lives Matter. How do you think the show, from its founding in 2015, 2016 here, how do you think it holds up in the conversation of today in 2020?
Mm, I mean, I think it's done I think it's done tastefully, in both, in like a big picture and more smaller picture things. There's one historical inaccuracy which I wish they did better, which is like the the play the musical makes Hamilton seem like he's anti-slavery, which
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't,
Yeah.
as most historians would say. Not saying that he was pro-slavery, but he was kind of neutral.
Yeah.
He just kind of was, like, just didn't really. It was one of the things that he didn't really talk about that much,
Mm-hmm.
or really have an opinion on. And there are. I don't think there was any physical proof or like anything that is definitive behind it, but there were rumors or there's thoughts that he traded slaves for like a cousin or something like that, or like for his father-in-law at a point, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was one thing that I kind of wish that Hamilton didn't really do,
Mm-hmm.
because they definitely, especially in the second cabinet battle, or the first cabinet battle, I'm sorry,
Yep.
it definitely made it seem like he was anti-slavery. Um,
Have you
it,
heard? Have you heard the third cabinet battle that was cut from the show, but has been it's out there. It's been recorded. Because like the third cabinet battle was specifically a debate between Jefferson and Hamilton over slavery.
really?
Yeah, and it's definitely seek it out and listen to it. It's on the going back to the Hamilton mixtape. Like the Hamilton mixtape came full circle because they released an album of songs inspired by or just kind of like remixes of Hamilton songs, including a lot of the like cut songs from the show, like Cabinet Battle 3. So yeah, you can listen to basically Lynn's original demo of Cabinet Battle 3, and the conversation it has is around slavery, and the one of the reasons it gets kicked out of the show is because it didn't really fit within the confines of the structure that they were trying to tell. It also basically ends on the conversation of like, well, we're not making a decision on slavery, so we're just kicking it down we're kicking the issue down the line. And one of the other reasons that it might have been cut is because it even more than Cabinet Battle 1 puts Hamilton in a anti-slavery light. So that might have been even further misrepresenting the character. Because yeah, it very much is like Jefferson and Madison on the like, no, we can't, well, it is addressing, I think that like all of the founding fathers kind of like recognized that it wasn't great that they owned people, but it was also like the system of the time, and they couldn't completely dismantle that, especially in the rawness of the new country. So it's definitely a curse of any show around this subject matter is you've got these great men talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, while they also own other dudes. It's another thing in the motif video that I mentioned. There's a clip of Daveed Diggs talking about playing Thomas Jefferson and basically coming to terms with that and being like, Thomas Jefferson wrote these amazing things, and he was also a bad dude. Like
Yeah.
those two things can and do exist as like
Yeah.
simultaneous statements, and I think
Bad people can make good things.
Yeah.
Like that is 100%
yeah,
valid.
I think one of the things I talk about when I talk about that in the context of the show is like it is still a 2.5-hour musical that can't dive into every topic,
Yes.
and this is another thing, a little fun fact trivia thing for you. Chris Jackson playing Washington.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was gonna mention it too.
Yeah, in the final number, as Philippa Sue is singing about like the legacy of all these people, she has the line, I speak out against slavery.
Yeah.
And you have Christopher Jackson as Washington kind of like bowing his head in deference that he didn't do enough in that regard, and that's his kind of personal like reconciliation of that aspect of Washington's character, and recognizing that like, yeah, this should have been a better story.
Yeah. And I actually did a good amount of research on Eliza one night when I just couldn't fall asleep after watching Hamilton, and yeah, she was very much against slavery, and she wanted to educate not specifically black people, but as many children as she could, more or less to read the Bible specifically, but still like Eliza was like, for the most part, as far as from what I've read, was a really good person. And I think that the musical personifies that really well.
Yeah, she's like I talked about in either with Logan or Cam Abbott, the idea that like she's really the only like good and true character in this. Everybody else is very much painted with like shades of gray,
Yes.
except Eliza, and that's something that also comes up in the Hamilton the Revolution book, is kind of Lin-Manuel Miranda like recognizing that and just being like, she was just like, she was a good person. And like, yeah, like they make mention of Washington's failings, both kind of his first battles where he lost a whole bunch of men to a massacre, but then also the fact, the coming to terms with that moment in Yorktown. Does this really mean freedom? Black and white soldiers, does this mean freedom? And Washington being the one saying not yet. Obviously, because slavery was going to still loom large over this country for the next 240 years, as has been the case. And it's something that also in kind of the context of that conversation, I often bring up the idea of like when the slave trade started in America to now. America was a slave trading country longer than it hasn't been still. It was prior to the country's founding. It was like it was that ingrained in the country that it's still like, obviously a lot of the conversation we have today is still kind of feeling the effects of that nature and that complex, terrible history. So yeah, I don't think the show could, for what it was trying to do, could address everything in that front. But I think Lynn and others have come out and said like, yeah, maybe we could have done that a little bit better and portrayed it a little bit more appropriately, as opposed to trying to put Hamilton up on a pedestal that he himself also wasn't on. But yeah, it's definitely it has taken a new light in the context. Did you? Because I found out about this through the kind of funny thing when Yusuf mentioned it. Have you gone through and watched the Undefeated Presents Hamilton in depth conversations they had?
I did watch. It came up right out when the credits rolled. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know this was a thing, so I watched it.
Yeah, it's something that one of the segments we'll get into is like the extra credit, other suggestions. When I recorded the first 2 episodes, they weren't doing that. Like that was not the suggested solution or suggested next kind of thing. It was a series of other musicals and stuff like that. So when Yusuf mentioned that, I was like, oh, I didn't see that. Where like because he mentioned it as like an extras or like like one of Disney Plus's extras. I was like, oh, I didn't see that, because when I looked at the extras, I had only seen like the trailer for Hamilton. And so yeah, it looks like basically after the first couple days they were like, hey, maybe it doesn't make sense for Sound of Music to be the first thing that Disney Plus is recommending after you watch Hamilton. So I appreciate that they kind of put that out there as like it is a current conversation with the cast of Hamilton, talking about the show in the current climate in a post George Floyd kind of world, and how that changes the story. And I think one of the things that Lynn has talked about in that interview, as well as others, is Hamilton is one of its most resonant things is that it shines light on so many stories and it examines so many ideas that it can kind of be malleable and change around the current conversation that is happening in the country. And so it's a fascinating, like, sometimes it's a focus on the immigrant story of Hamilton's own journey, but then other times it's a focus on kind of, let's look at these historical figures, not on the pedestal that they were, that they've been placed on for the last 200 years, but let's look at it as flawed individuals, which they were, and kind of examine those flaws and recognize that they did these great things. They started this country. They, did this unheard of thing, but they also did these terrible things that we don't, sweep under the rug either. So I think that's very resonant to the obviously the conversations we're having in today's kind of era. Well, aside from that, let's just talk about, what do we like about the show? So you mentioned you have a favorite song earlier, and I didn't pry because I knew it was going to come up later. What is your favorite song in Hamilton?
For me, it has to be "You'll Be Back."
You'll Be Back. Okay.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched that performance, and I legitimately was like, that was phenomenal. Like, I love the song. Like, Jonathan Groff just absolutely killed it. And I think that I think I realized that during that performance, because I haven't seen him actually act
Mm-hmm.
a lot. Obviously he's in
He's
Frozen.
Kristoff, but yeah, you don't
Yeah,
see
he's in
him.
Frozen, and then I know that he's in Mindhunters on Netflix, but I have yet to watch that show.
Mm-hmm.
But he is an incredible facial actor.
Yeah.
Incredible facial actor. Like another actor that I think does it incredibly well, in my opinion, is Haley Steinfeld. I think she is like one of the best. I
Yeah.
think she's one of the best actresses in the business, like period. I don't care that she's in her early 20s, like, and she started as a kid. Like I think from go, like she's been one of the best actresses in Hollywood, and but Jonathan Groff, I was like immediately like noticed, because I don't know, I'm just very observant about really random things,
Mm-hmm.
and so I just immediately was like, wow, his facial acting is incredible. um and I think that the way I just I think that out of all the characters in the show, I feel like his performance as King George III, I just can't imagine it being done another way.
Mm.
I
Okay.
I, I just I just can't imagine someone else doing that role.
Mm-hmm.
While every other role I've seen, like, I'm like, wow, this is really great, but like Jonathan Groff for as King George, I don't know, it is entrancing for me, and he's just so funny, and it's so subtle, and like I love it so much. And I love all three of the songs, but obviously the first one is longer. And I that was like my one complaint. I was like, I wish these two songs were longer. What Comes Next, and what was the last one called?
Yeah.
What's the
It's
last one
escaping
called?
me.
I'm looking at I'm seeing it right here. I Know Him. I
Yeah.
Know Him.
Yeah.
Because that's when he finds out that John Adams is taking Washington's place.
Mm-hmm.
Which I definitely want to talk about, this whole John Adams bit of the musical
Yeah. Okay.
later on. Yeah, but I loved Jonathan Groff's performance. I really wish that him and Daveed Diggs were in a different category at the Tonys, because Daveed Diggs, like,
Yeah.
also just absolutely fantastic. Uh, and he's one of my favorite people in the performing arts, whether it be film, television, theater,
Mm-hmm.
right now. But Jonathan Groff just absolutely killed it.
It's interesting, especially because as somebody who didn't know the show, you didn't have like the context necessarily for his moments, because on the album, like, you get those three King George songs and you think that's it. So like both Cameron and Logan, I think, talked about in their episodes the idea that, like, when I Know Him ends and King George just goes and sits down on stage and dances through like the next number and stuff, like
Yeah,
they didn't know that was a thing, and you don't know that that's a thing unless you see it live, and how
exactly.
he comes in and like dances and is all giddy and joyous during
Yeah,
rental
during the
pamphlets.
Reynolds pamphlet.
Like, yeah,
Yes.
the King George aspect of that is like is a surprise to people that know the album really well but don't know the show, haven't seen the show. So you getting, like, experiencing all this just kind of like as a normal thing for the first time, you didn't necessarily have that expectation set that then that gets subverted there. But yeah, let's talk about
Yeah.
dive into it's a fascinating pick, because, like, yeah, it's a great performance, but yeah, it's like one of the things they talk about in the book is the idea that you can, like, that role is such a, like, disconnected from the whole rest of the show that, like, you can basically stunt cast that with anybody if you wanted to do, like, hey, let's bring it, like, this big, Hollywood celebrity or something is looking to do a show for a month. Like, we could go and cast them and bring them in, and they can just do this number. They don't have to have like a week's worth of, like, put in rehearsals to, like, get used to working with everybody else outside of really, like, those couple numbers. But it's
Yeah.
pretty much they come out, they do their thing, they get off stage, and that's why it is. Brian Darcy James, who kind of originated the role, is also the person who originated the role of Shrek in Shrek the Musical on Broadway. And
Okay.
then you have, as I mentioned earlier, Andrew Rannells, who originated the role of Elder Price in Book of Mormon, came in and
Yes.
did like a short stint. There's another great Ham for Ham video out there that I encourage you to look up if you haven't seen it already. Is Jonathan Groff, Andrew Rannells, and Brian Darcy James doing the Schuyler sisters number as the Schuyler Georges. It's
That sounds
the three of them
amazing.
come out and lip sync it, and Renee Elise Goldsberry basically plays the Burr part to kind of introduce it. And so they do the whole thing. They lip sync. They do some of the choreography and stuff. And it's the three of them all wearing their King George crowns.
Oh my gosh. Please
Definitely,
send me that.
yeah, definitely. I'll send that to you afterwards as well, and I'll include it in the description. Because yeah, it's just a fun. I don't know if you know the history of the Ham for Ham videos and stuff, but it's basically the many Broadway musicals do a lottery where they'll invite people to come and they reserve the first 2 rows of seats, and they'll give those seats away to people 2 hours before the show. You get a chance to go and buy the ticket for like super cheap. And for Hamilton, they did it for a $10 bill, so it was Ham for Ham. You can come see Hamilton for a Hamilton, and there was such an outpouring of people showing up to try and see the show because it was the hottest ticket in town, and everything, that Lin-Manuel Miranda and the cast didn't want people leaving empty-handed, so they would basically come out and do like a little performance for those people at the stage door. And so they would do, there's a fun one that I just saw for the first time a couple days ago of Oak doing Defying Gravity as Mickey Mouse. So he just does the whole thing in a Mickey Mouse voice and just sings through Defying Gravity. And so yeah, and people just have recorded those little performances and put them up on YouTube and stuff. So they're out there, and there are a ton of them. But yeah, the Schuyler Georges is a fun highlight of them. So I definitely recommend checking that out. But I want to get back to the John Adams thing that you kind of mentioned, because there's another cut song about the Adams administration, and in particular, just kind of like they don't include Adams as a character because there was already enough other characters to dive into.
Makes sense.
So really the only thing from the Adams administration song that still exists is "Sit Down, John, You Fat Mother, Bleep." But there's a whole rap before that again is also on the mixtape that Yatsky? No. Is it Yatsky? I don't know. Very fast rapper Watsky, right?
Okay.
He does on the Hamilton mixtape album.
Okay.
He does the original version of that song. And
okay.
it's Blessing mentioned it in the kind of funny thing. That was like the one song that he knew about going into the show. And then it ends up not actually being in the show. So yeah, it's Adams was going to be examined a little bit more, but they kind of ultimately cut it because they're like, we don't have room to add another character in the show and dive into the complex relationship that Adams had with so many of these other characters without muddying the water. So they just kind of ultimately pull him out. But is there anything else you wanted to kind of like address or touch on that?
It's more of the historical aspects of it that I find interesting, because I don't know. Have you watched the film 1776?
I've not, no.
So it's basically like the movies. It's William Daniels from Boy Meets World for the Feeney fans out there.
Yep.
He plays John Adams, and it focuses on him, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson as they're like trying to get the Declaration ratified. They're and it's kind of like that battle between like the big thing that the big confliction with the Declaration was abolishing slavery.
Yep.
Which Jefferson was historically for, but still was still owned slaves his whole life, basically, over 600 slaves, and when he died he did not free his slaves, so he's a very contradictory person in that sense.
Yep.
But which I actually wish that they played with more with Jefferson in Hamilton, that instead of being just a straight up like enemy of Hamilton, just like show something that like, oh, Jefferson's not completely terrible, because they like all he says in What I Miss, I wrote a declaration and said I gotta go, and it's just like, well, I like that line for the more comedic purposes, but it's not. I feel like how like lenient not lenient, but casual it is said in the song. I don't feel like that was the actual case. And then, you know, with John Adams, like John Adams was a big factor into getting the Declaration of Independence figured out. You know, I feel that that was, you know, because the ongoing joke in the musical is like, you know, John Adams doesn't do anything, like he does nothing, you know, like he's useless, like that type of thing.
Yep.
So I wish that they did kind of, and I know that the musical starts after 1776 and all that stuff, or like it starts in 1776, doesn't it?
It starts before, right? Yeah.
And Aaron Burr.
I mean, yeah, like because I guess the war, they've already started. They've already signed the Declaration of Independence, right?
Yeah.
They're already kind of doing the war. So yeah, it's in that era, pre founding of the country, but probably post 1776. I mean,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
taking out like the number Alexander Hamilton that's just talking about his kind of upbringing and getting to America.
Yeah. So yeah, I just listened to the beginning of Aaron Burr, sir, and it starts in 1776.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel, yeah, I understand that Manuel, Manuel wanted to cut John Adams because even though he has a place there, it's just too many characters.
Mm-hmm.
But I just kind of wish that they touched upon that a little bit more in the beginning of the musical, just kind of
Yeah.
like you know, it just got to the point where it was like an ongoing joke, like, oh, John Adams, like he does nothing, he sucks, like
Yeah.
and especially in I Know Him, which I mean it was still fun, but I don't know, I just think that there could have been something there for that.
Yeah, no, and I have a little footnote that I pulled from the Hamilton the Revolution, from I Know Him, on that's that little guy who spoke to me all those years ago. The footnote is Lin-Manuel Miranda saying, "I'm just taking it as a given that everyone watched the John Adams miniseries on HBO. The scene between Adams and King George in that film is my favorite scene in the whole series." So in Lin-Manuel Miranda's mind, John Adams and Paul Giamatti's portrayal of John Adams is very much like the canon John Adams for Hamilton here. He just kind of uses him as a punching bag for all that other stuff. And I think to kind of some of your other points there, I think there are so many other stories that delve into, you know, Jefferson's conflicted relationship with slavery, and kind of Adams' power dynamic as you know, first vice president, second president kind of thing. But we hadn't had really any significant stories about Hamilton, so the decision to make Hamilton kind of the central figure of this story just means that as a result, you know, all the other characters in those other people's lives kind of doesn't get as much attention and focus, because we've already heard some of those stories.
And and there is that bit where Angelica says that like every other founding father has a story, like has their story told, like that type of thing. So yeah, I totally get that. I just thought it was something, again, just something interesting, just based off of my personal knowledge and of John Adams and all that jazz. But yeah,
I was trying to see, because I was looking at the book, and the book as well has the Cabinet Battle 3. It has it written out in the book as like, hey, here were the lyrics of that like incomplete song. But then also they talk about just kind of I think it has the lyrics for the John Adams number as well. But basically the John Adams number is it's the letter that Hamilton is sending to Adams that ends with "Sit down, John, you fat motherfucker," and it's basically him berating Adams because of their very contentious public relationship, and so it's more John Adams hate that they just ultimately cut from the show because they couldn't devote, you know, a whole song to a character that's not in the show, in that regard. So
yeah, again, like without John being in it, it makes sense for sure.
Yeah. Any other favorite numbers or favorite characters or favorite just elements of the show, especially as somebody you've consumed it 8 times in a week?
So I do think you have a lot of validity behind the fact that, like, you know, the show focuses around, even though it's like Hamilton, it's about Hamilton, that focus is still around Burr at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like, I think that there's an argument that it's for Aaron Burr, that it's for Eliza,
Yep.
and that it's for Hamilton. I think it really just depends on. I think it's different for everyone. Because for me, I'm very much a Team Eliza person. I like. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like at the end of the day, this, uh, even though she isn't, she really isn't in the musical that much. I think at the end of the day, it was supposed to be like a tribute to her and like what she did for Hamilton
Mm-hmm.
in the long run.
And I would think
And
it's very telling that those are the three point of view characters that we get, because obviously we get
yeah,
most of the story told from Burr's perspective, but he does make a point of handing it over to Hamilton to tell the Mariah
yeah,
Reynolds story, and then at the end of Burn, and at the end of Burn, at the end of The World Was Wide Enough, Eliza takes back the narrative, and she becomes the narrator for the final moments of the show.
yeah,
And so it is like those are the three perspectives that we as an audience see them telling their own story, as opposed to like the
yeah.
conceit of like them telling other people's story or something like that.
Yeah, I definitely think the narration shifts, and I think that the point at the end of the day when it comes to just Hamilton as a person is that he was an obviously flawed individual that just did what he felt was right in the political spectrum of things, in founding this country. Uh, but and like Eliza didn't want, even though he was unfaithful to her, didn't want that thing to completely ruin everything that he worked for. Like it like him founding this country, helping to found this country was bigger than them.
Yeah.
It was and and I think that's very much kind of in It's Quiet Uptown, that's kind of like the message that I got from that, and it's like even more solidified um in the world who was wide enough, or is it Who Lives Who Dies Who Tells Your Story, the
Oh
last song
yeah,
of the musical.
yeah. Right. Yeah.
She's when she's speaking out, and uh that she forgives him, like, and that it's not like something that like she will obviously never forget that he did that, but like she forgives him, and she knows that what he is doing is bigger than both of them, and like the future of the country. And again, like that in no way excuses his actions,
Yeah.
but that was like her choice. That was what she decided to do. And I think that, well, another thing that's really interesting in the regarding Eliza is that in the history books, people don't really know what she did when it came to after the Reynolds pamphlets came out,
Mm-hmm.
about like the letters and things like that. Like, no one knows for certain, which allowed Lynn to uh be more flexible, like have more of his own creativity as to what happened because of that. Um,
Yeah,
because
that's the whole point of Burn is
yeah,
she took herself, like, we don't know where she stood on everything, so the personification of that in the show, she takes herself out of the narrative because she clearly isn't in the narrative
yeah,
of history during that time. And it's something that, yeah,
yeah,
I think both Lynn and Ron Chernow, who wrote the original biography, kind of inspired the show, really kind of were fascinated with, in that they couldn't find kind of that, like, how did she respond to this? What was her
hmm
historical context, until you see kind of her trying to celebrate and continue his legacy.
yeah, and because they literally can't find any letters or any documentations of like their relationship, like like personal letters or anything like that. Um, which I think is really cool, uh and again, definitely benefits the story for Eliza. Um So yeah, yeah, I really like it, and I think that's really uh interesting as well. I find it cool that there's just like a as someone who has a musical background, the how there is like, you know, the rapping, and then there's the hip hop, but then when it comes to specifically Philippa and Jonathan, they are very much classically trained singers.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and just from my own like vocal class experiences, like, you know, I'm not a good singer in any way, but I did have to take vocal classes at a point. Just the way that they articulate is very much like, yeah, they, you know, like Philippa went to Juilliard, like, you know, I totally see that. And you know, Jonathan very much the way that he dictates um the lyrics very much, and part of that is, one, he's singing in a British accent, and British people are, you know, the way they speak, that it's more articulate in like just general, but also when it comes to the singing too, it is very much coherent in that sense. And I just like the differations,
Mm-hmm.
that like, even though that there's still like it's known as a hip hop musical of sorts, that it's still, and Leslie Odom does it too, to a sense. I think it's more just for the way he wants to set the, like, of how he's feeling. Like he like there are points like in the beginning of the Schuyler Sisters and and other songs where he's like very articulate, and like with his T's and things like that, that you don't but it's not like a consistent thing that he does throughout the musical. And I feel like that's more based off just trying to give more personality to Burr's character and how he's feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But then like again, specifically Eliza and Jonathan, or you know, Philippa and Jonathan, they are more classically trained, and there's still that classical vocals that are still in the um musical, you know, because you know, musicals, um like it's, you know, historically musicals were much more classical, obviously,
Yeah.
and that is still present, even though it is more modern feeling hip hop R&B focused, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, I found the little reference to Burn that I was kind of alluding to. The footnote on that number is Lynn saying, Eliza's response. Eliza's response is lost to time. Those letters were burned after Hamilton's death. This gave me enormous freedom, but also gave me a dramatic action. What if Eliza's reaction is to erase her reaction from memory? Writing this song is the first time I introduced the theme of narrative for Eliza, which I then promptly went back in and threaded into That Would Be Enough and the finale of the show. So yeah, that's kind of they recognize that her response to all this was gone, and they kind of used that as creative impetus for that aspect of the show. And to your points about, like, this is very much like, you know, the quick and easy pitch is it's a hip hop musical about Alexander Hamilton, and the pitch makes no sense. But it's also just the way in the door, because once you step aside, like hip hop and the patter of hip hop is what Lynn uses to get so much story into here. One of the little trivia tidbits is this, like, there's 2 to 3 times as much words in Hamilton as there are in most musicals.
Yeah.
And it's because of the pace of the show and how much he is condensing in there. One of the closest analogs I mentioned earlier is Les Mis, which tells the story of like a 600-700 page book condensed into a 3-hour musical, and it's condensed in there because the whole thing is sung. There's no like scene transitions for dialogue and stuff. It's the whole thing is being sung, just like Hamilton. The whole thing is being sung through, but it's being sung through at a faster pace, at the pace that we associate with rap and hip hop and stuff. But that doesn't stop it from having songs that kind of bring it back. And yeah, all of Jonathan Groff's stuff is very slow and more classical Broadway theater. It's and then Burn is your 10 o'clock number that the starring ingenue kind of gets to sing out and belt out to the world. And Lin-Manuel Miranda is so much a student of musical theater that he weaves all those things together. One of the relationships that he talks about in the book is he was repeatedly going to people like Stephen Schwartz behind Wicked or Stephen Sondheim behind Company and stuff, and kind of like going to them and saying like, hey, like, what do you think of this number, or what is this? And he's kind of like working with and learning from the masters of both the worlds of hip hop and the worlds of musical theater to bring them together to tell this story. And what we end up is this, this thing that has transcended both genres almost effectively. So yeah, it's one of the things to your point of like the professional trained, like, as somebody who also like studied theater, took voice classes, took singing classes, also I can't sing, but like one of the things that impresses me beyond belief is Daveed Diggs and his ability to enunciate at the speed he's doing it in French or in a French accent as Lafayette. Like the speed with which he's saying a lot of those things, especially by the time we get to like Guns and Ships, and he's doing it in his French accent that we can still hear and understand perfectly clearly, is like masterclass in vocal technique and enunciation, and it's something that I think he's drawing much more from his background as a hip hop artist and in his work from Freestyle Love Supreme, the kind of like improv music troupe thing that he does with Lin-Manuel Miranda and with like Christopher Jackson and stuff. And it's like I can't not watch those numbers and just be in awe of him and his talent. So like the fact that he's going out there and has blown up as a result of the show, I think is a testament to like his just raw talent in that nature as well.
Yeah, I actually saw someone, this was actually a while ago, but like someone posted that that there's an argument that Daveed Diggs is equally, if not more talented than Donald Glover, and I completely agree with that. I think Daveed Diggs is like an absolute like powerhouse of talent. Mm-hmm. And also just like with his other experiences, first off, like I believe, I don't know if he got his master's or just his bachelor's, but regardless, he went to Brown for theater, so there's mm-hmm. that. And then he also, before he did his career started, he taught like poetry and rap and stuff like that for schools in Oakland, so he definitely like has been around that expertise for a while. So definitely an expert in that sense, and very, very, very talented. While I do think his his execution as Lafayette is more impressive, I definitely enjoy him more as Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I wanted to bring up just about the musical in general, that this is the second time I thought about it while we've been speaking, but I forgot it I lost it the first time. But one thing that I kind of noticed about like the first act compared to the second act is just like how the first act kind of feels like a fantasy tale for specifically for Hamilton. Like just everything goes his way. Mm-hmm. Everything just goes right. Everything's perfect. Yeah. And then like the second half, just everything is like much. It feels like just the tone, like once the first real song that he's in, and you see like how time has shifted and like how he's grown up, and Philip is an adult. Like it feels, the tone shift from the first act just feels so immediate. Yeah. And feels so much more grounded and adult, and I think that I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's Washington's line, "Winning is easy, winning being the first half, governing is harder, governing the second half." And then there's also a fun case to be made, and Lynn has kind of at least joked about this on Twitter that I've seen. He also mentions Macbeth in his letter to Angelica, and anybody that has done theater knows that like saying Macbeth is a big no-no on stage kind of thing, and so there's the idea that like when he says Macbeth, his whole world starts falling apart.
That's funny.
And so it's kind of a play on that whole like stereotype of the play Macbeth having real live,
Consequences.
like it's like the whole idea behind the story is that Shakespeare put like real witches' curses in the words of Macbeth, and so that show just haunts theaters to this day or that kind of thing. But like it's something I never really ascribed to myself, but I love that he like the Lin-Manuel Miranda like uses that as like as another layer to the show of like, hey, yeah, he alludes to it like, I hope you realize I don't have to say the play, but then he says like, I'm Macbeth or whatever, and so's Banquo and all that stuff, and so it's like, no, he just said it, so yep, now Hamilton's screwed for the rest of that second act.
Yeah, but I just thought that was something that I really, after a few viewings, I noticed like, oh, like everything just like goes right in this one and feels like a fairy tale, and then the last half is just like complete, for the most part. And leading up to Philip's death is just really everything goes against him.
Yeah.
And then there's just like the last end is just like about like hope and again forgiveness and the drive to push forward and things like that. Let's we can talk more about some of the songs. I would say that even though that "You'll Be Back" is my favorite song, the song that I just kind of sing to myself, me and Celia, is the Schuyler Sisters. 100%. 100%. I'll just like be walking around, just like Angelica, and it's just like out of nowhere. I love that song so much, and I also think it's one of the best, like just stage execution songs. Just like using the rotating circle, like, oh, they're walking down the street and then Aaron Burr shows up and all that jazz. Helpless is a great song. Philip is like such a fantastic singer.
Yeah, one of the things I loved when I saw it for the first time, because you get from the album Helpless going into Satisfied, you get the whole like rewind, and I had a way of how that played out in my head. And it wasn't too different from how they actually do things, where they basically like go back to the beginning of Helpless, actually to the beginning of the Winter's Ball number, and you see it now from Angelica's perspective and stuff. And I love how they have like certain little callback moments to like little choreography that was set up previously, and so you just kind of get to see. It's one of those things that like theater, this version of theater is doing it so well that you could do it in film, but it wouldn't have as much like resonance or as much impact. And so like the Helpless into Satisfied kind of combo is certainly like one of my favorites. And to what you were saying like way back earlier, like you've pretty much had like the one set favorite. For me, like it changes on any given day. And I've listened to this show so many times, or depending on the mood I'm in or what character I'm identifying with today, like that will drastically change like what numbers really stand out for me. My typical one tends to be like Wait For It, and largely because I as much as I don't want to necessarily identify myself as a Burr, I think I am, in that I will have moments where I'm like, where I will go and reach for the thing, but I'm so much more content to just like stay back and hope the good things come to me. And obviously, as we see, that doesn't always work out. But like that's also just the reality of who I am. And so like Wait For It is the one that I will like when I'm in the car driving somewhere, I'll just pull up Wait For It and I'll just like sing that in my car.
Oh, I mean that's great. You have a song that you can relate to. Yeah, like because for me, I know that "You'll Be Back" is my favorite song because even though I'm not a great singer, like I think I can, I think I'm competent, like at least in a classical sense. That if I found out that like, oh, auditions for a production of Hamilton was happening where I live, I would go and audition for King George. I would legitimately I would feel confident enough that I'm just like, all right, I want to try and do this. Even if I don't make it, I want to at least try because that's how much I enjoy singing those songs, and I think I can sing those songs.
Yeah.
So
It's like
but
you get the benefit of it's a character role, so you can do it in the affected British accent, and it like doing it like that kind of hides or can mask, any deficiencies in actual singing.
yeah,
I'm the same way. Like it'll be wait for it. And I'll sing and be like, well, that's a part I would never be able to do. But then like you'll be back, we'll come on. I'll be like, well, I could like this song I could actually sing, and people wouldn't like throw earplugs in their ears while I do it, because you're like it's in the same way like Jimmy Fallon does it on the Hamilton mixtape. He sings it, and it's like he can be good, but he doesn't have like the greatest voice, but he can do character voices and stuff, and he does that number really well. And so yeah, it's one that you can get away with because there's a humor to it, there's a bite to it, and you don't have to sing it like well. You're not having to be like the best singer in the world to sing it, because it's intended to be like a funny little song.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that I think that even though because there are certain songs where I'm like I'm not a huge fan of, but there's like a specific moment in the song, like specifically in the movie, with both like the visual and the camera work and just like the singing itself, that like really like hit me, give me chills every time. Like I love I really can't quote it, but like in Skylar Sisters, the last time they do in the greatest city of the world before going back to the Angelica, that part,
Yeah.
like that part like always gives me chills. And then obviously like that the end run with the three of them is great, like at the very end of the song. um that that's amazing. And then like I think it's is it is it I think it's Stay Alive. I think
First one or the second one?
Oh, I think it's I believe it's I think it's History Has Its Eyes on You. Yeah, it's History Has Its Eyes on You, and it's when Christopher Jackson is just like singing the super long Alexander, like that part.
Mm-hmm.
And it just like shows, and it's like and it's going in a circle, like the floor is rotating, just like close up on his face, and just the singing is just immaculate. Chills every time. The end of One Last Time with Christopher Jackson, obviously, like incredibly, I literally have chills right now, like talking about it. There are those moments that that the movie specifically has, which I again like kind of is why I feel like that the performances of the movie I think are more are better and more impactful than the soundtrack. Like I'll listen to the soundtrack, I'm like, oh man, I wish they had like this version, the movie version, at this specific part, like because the singing, even though like the notes are the same, the performances are always going to be different. Because that's just how singing works. But yeah, and then Satisfied like is incredible, absolutely incredible. Just how they use the floor to do the whole rewind segment, and then near the end where it fast forwards again, doing basically like the whole ending of Helpless going straight into Angelica doing the toast again. Like some of the best like just stage work I think I've ever seen. Like not choreography, not particularly, but just the way that they execute that was just incredible.
Yeah, the blocking work. One of my favorite uses of the turntable is in, I think it's in Nonstop.
Yes,
yes.
I know what you're talking about. I was gonna say Nonstop too.
Yeah, you have that moment where Angelica's basically telling Hamilton that she's going off to London, and they have like this little nice moment where they're walking down stage, and it's just kind of like it's a break in the all the chaos and hecticness of Nonstop. And she departs, and the turntable moves Philippa, Eliza, right into her place, and then he like picks up the conversation with her, and they move back the other way, kind of thing. And it's a great like it's a great use of the two women of his life kind of thing, and being able to put them, in that position, for the audience to really see the trade-off of those two characters, without it being a more hokey version of that same kind of blocking or something like that.
Yeah, and I like just in the beginning as well with Aaron Burr, where he's just like why do you assume you're the smartest in the room, and it's just going in a circle like that. I thought that was a really cool use of the turntable as well. I'm trying to think about what other songs I really like. Yeah, Nonstop is definitely one of my favorite songs in it. I think
Nonstop is like, I can't write when I'm listening to music, but like if I need to hype myself up to write a thing, I will listen to Nonstop and just be like, yes, you should be writing like you're running out of time, Trevor. What are you doing?
Yes, and I think that Yorktown, Battle of Yorktown, has the best choreography just from a dancing and like that type of perspective. But I think Nonstop is my favorite just from a stage presence, like the part where all the ensemble people are around Hamilton and he's writing on the table, and then Burr's just like pointing to him like, why do you write like you're running out of... I'm just, that chills. Like I love that moment so much. Yeah, so that's great. Dear Theodosia is a great little song as well.
Yeah.
I like that one. What comes next? Like all the King George songs are great. I also I love how when it ends, how that song ends, he just kind of like walks, which is after basically America wins the war.
Yeah.
He just walks out all confused and just like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Super great.
Wait,
again,
what?
just exactly. Just, and those things that just make Jonathan Groff like feel to me like I can't imagine at the very least anyone doing the role better than Jonathan Groff. It's just so great.
Yeah, one of the things I've touched on in prior episodes a little bit is like I love the opening number of Alexander Hamilton because and I've like got a newfound appreciation for it, having seen the show live a couple times when it is toured through, is like that show that number is introducing you to basically all of the characters with the exception of King George. So for everybody but King George, you're getting a quick little like 4-minute number that basically says like, hey, you've probably listened to the original soundtrack. We get that. This is who you're going to be dealing with today. This is who you're going to be introduced today. I hope we hope you'll be along for that ride. And I don't think it was necessarily even the intent of the song, but I think it's a beneficial side effect of the song, especially given how big how big it is blown up. But in hearing you talk about King George, I'm like, oh yeah, but you don't get that for King George. So your experience with King George when you see it live is very much lives and dies on what he does in those first moments when he comes out for "You'll Be Back," or not?
"You'll Be Back" is the first one.
Yeah. And because that is like that's the first time you're going to get introduced to this version of it that isn't going to be Jonathan Groff, and what's your takeaway going to be? And when I seen it live, like it was good. I laughed at the moments I'm supposed to laugh at in those numbers. But yeah, it's one of those things I don't look back and think like, oh yeah, we had a really good King George. Like we had a really good Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette for one of the nights I got to see it.
You saw it in New York? Or
no. It toured through Phoenix a couple years ago, and I got to see it as I ended up going and seeing it twice while it was in town.
Nice.
And it was one of those like I mentioned this on a previous episode, but yeah, it was like prior to that I had looked at it was playing in San Francisco during like Kind of Funny Prom or something like that, and I was like, maybe I'll go see it there. Like I'll just duck away from community events and stuff, and I'll just go see Hamilton. And I was looking at $400 tickets for a single performance, obstructed view kind of thing, so it would have been like in the back of the house behind a pillar or something like that.
Yeah, no.
So I was like, no, not really what I'm looking at. But when they brought it through through Tempe for its national tour, they included it as part of the season. So if you bought what I did, I bought like a season pass for $400 or something like that, and I got to see Hamilton as well as like 7 other shows for that same price. And it was because normally when you have a show like that, like when they bring in Wicked or when they bring in The Lion King, the show that like everybody's gonna want to like pay an arm and a leg to see, they do it as a standalone thing outside of the season, so they can charge those crazy prices. So the fact that they did it as part of the season, they touted the fact that they sold out their season tickets, and Hamilton also ran for a few extra weeks. So it was like, because the way it's done here is like you have a week's worth of a subscription season, and most of the shows that come through will only come through and they'll do that 1 week. But for Hamilton or other big shows, they'll do like the weeks. They'll do the week of subscribers, and then they'll do like 3 weeks where single ticket buyers can come and see it. And so I ended up seeing it once as part of like my subscription, and then I went and saw it one of the other nights as well.
Did it have a rotating floor?
Yeah. Okay. It's they have two, the show itself, and the touring production, which is built off of the Broadway one, has 2 turntables built in, so it's one turntable within another.
So it was like kind of connected through the Broadway company, but not like the current Broadway cast, or
right. Yeah, they basically rebuild the set and they take it around to all other houses, and that's cool. What you usually get when you see like a professional Broadway tour come through. It'll be like, hey, this is like the experience you would have gotten if you'd seen it on Broadway, but you can't see it on Broadway, compared to like when local companies, when the rights are opened up and local companies can start doing the show. That's when they'll have to figure out like, okay, we can't afford a stage with 2 turntables, so how are we going to have to try and do the show differently? Or like when high schools start doing Hamilton, how are they going to do the show? But yeah, the touring version of the show is usually built to be as reminiscent of the original production as possible. So yeah, they basically bring out because I talked to Cameron about this, because he thought that Gamage just has a turntable built in or just has a pit built in. I'm like, no, they don't. They have to add. They basically build the stage on top of their basic deck, and it's all run through like mechanical gears and stuff underneath. So
yeah. I've always been interested in theater. I just can't sing, and I don't think I would be a good actor. So I just kind of never really gave it a shot, and that might be just due to my lack of confidence. But I don't know. Again, like if I ever found out like, hey, like Hamilton's auditions are coming here, I'm like, all right, let's do it. I'll try it. You know what I mean? Worst thing can happen is I don't get in, and I can move on with my life.
Exactly. Worst thing that happens is you go and you sing, and they say no, and you go back to doing whatever you were doing. Best thing that happens, you get to play King George for his 3 songs.
Exactly.
I obviously I used to do theater, basically I often joke that I kind of traded in like my theater community for like the gaming community, because like my shift away from theater all happened basically around the time Kind of Funny broke off of IGN and started doing their own thing. But I have to look back and basically think I went and saw Much Ado About Nothing when I was in 8th grade. We took a field trip to go see basically what would be my high school doing that show. Like we'd read it for class, and the high school was doing it, so we went as a field trip to go see the high school do it. And I remember thinking then, I was like, I like Shakespeare enough that like I wasn't acting, I wasn't doing theater when I was in 8th grade, but I was like, if they ever do a Shakespeare play, I will audition for it. And I ended up actually doing a little bit of theater beforehand, but my senior year they did Midsummer Night's Dream, and I went out and auditioned for it, and I got cast in it. And it ended up being like my second or third show in theater in high school. My first one was I was a chorus member in Oklahoma, because basically any guy that they could get to sing, they cast in Oklahoma. And I had gotten into choir through like one of my friends in marching band. He basically did like a whole recruiting drive and was like, hey, come audition and be in the choir. You don't have to do solos. You're just kind of like with the other chorus, so you can blend and you can kind of like just mimic what you're hearing and stuff. So I was in like men's choir and our varsity choir, and that ended up in turn getting me into theater, and then I very rarely did musicals after that. Like Oklahoma was like my first show, but it was also like the only musical I think I ever did. The only other musical I really auditioned for, that I like seriously considered auditioning for, was another show called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, which was in a pre-Hamilton world. It was like a rock musical about Andrew Jackson. In like, it would probably do really well now in a post-Hamilton world where people are interested in like learning about the founding fathers or like the characters of American past through the lens of like a rock musical. But it did fine on off Broadway, but it didn't like blow up obviously like Hamilton did.
That'd be interesting to watch, because Andrew Jackson was
oh yeah, he's a problematic figure.
he's a person.
They definitely go into it. It would be very fascinating to see, because I saw that show and auditioned for it before, because that was like 2010, I think like 20, no, not 2010. It would have been 2014, I think, is when that happened. So it was a pre-Trump world, and it was a pre-Alexander Hamilton, or like pre-Hamilton world, and so now it would be a very different show, I think, to see what that would look like.
Yep.
But yeah, that's just kind of a quick like pass through for my own musical history, and yeah, I look at and would be like, especially as like King George is really like one of the very few like white characters in the show. I'm like, hey, I like, maybe if they do Hamilton, maybe that's what'll get me to go out and audition for shows again. But I also kind of like not having to spend my evenings and weekends like rehearsing and playing video games instead or something. So that's kind of like, I ultimately got like burnt out on doing theater, and that's why I don't do theater anymore. And instead now just talk about theater on podcasts. It's fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Like, yeah, I didn't. I think I went to 2 musicals when I was in high school, like my high school theater. They did Wizard of Oz once, which was fun, and then they did one that I legitimately wish, if I knew about the musical beforehand, I probably would have auditioned, because it was really funny, and I don't think it was really challenging vocally that I think I would have been able to do it. It was like 13 the musical.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah, that really funny musical, which is where Ariana Grande got her start, for those that don't know.
I want to say, I think Emma Stone was in 13 as well.
I think it was Elizabeth Gill, who was also on Victorious. She played Jade in Victorious. They both were in the original cast of 13.
Oh yeah, I wasn't talking original cast. I was talking like Emma Stone did community theater here in Phoenix before she like famously gave her parents a PowerPoint presentation to go like move to Hollywood, and then ends up getting cast in Superbad, and her career blows up and stuff. But so like I have friends that acted and worked with her in the theater community out here before she kind of took off. And I don't remember the timing of when 13 came out versus when she would have been doing stuff. It probably came out after
2008.
Yeah, it's probably after her after she'd kind of already moved away. But
yeah,
one of my other favorite songs, and one of the so Jason Robert Brown is the one who wrote 13. Also wrote a musical called The Last 5 Years, which is one of my favorite shows, which is referenced in Nobody Needs to Know, or Say No to This. Sorry, the end of Say No to This is Nobody Needs to Know, which is a song from The Last 5 Years, and the footnote in the book is basically Lin-Manuel Miranda like wrote this thing and was like, there's already this perfect number out there that talks about, infidelity and cheating on your wife, and has a perfect ending. So he called up Jason Robert Brown and said, hey, do you mind if I use, that lyric in my song? So that's how you get the end of Say No to This. And so that's one of those, like, when I first listened to this, I wouldn't have caught all the hip hop references, but I caught that reference of Nobody Needs to Know, and the musical sting that kind of closes that number out as a reference to The Last 5 Years. So bring it all full circle with the 13 reference there.
Well, how about that?
There you go. Yeah. Lots of like, again, there's so much in here, both on a hip hop side, on a historical side, and on a musical theater side that Lynn has like packed into that show, that they're like, you can just kind of, you could do endless podcasts about like, well, there are some good podcasts out there. There's one that Mike Drucker had done, I want to say called the Room Where It Happened podcast, that he was doing, where basically they were bringing in guests, and each guest would come in and they would talk about a specific number of the show, a specific song of the show, and kind of like their thoughts on the show, on the song, why they liked it, and all that kind of stuff. So definitely check that out if you are in need of consuming more and more Hamilton content. It's Mike Drucker and Trayvon Free, I believe, sat down and did that podcast together a few years back. Yeah. Any other favorite moments or anything you want to highlight before we dive into giving the show a grade?
Oh yeah, sure. We'll try and speed run this because we're running. I don't know if we're running a little long. I'm cool. Keep talking.
Oh yeah, no,
I don't want
to. I'm perfect. Yeah, I don't want to. Like the one we did with Logan was 2.5 hours. I think me and Cam
cool.
was 2 hours. So yeah, we're perfectly on track for talking about Hamilton, because it's a fun one that provokes a lot of conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation. Yeah. So what did I miss? That song is great. I love that song.
It's a great introduction to Jefferson.
Great introduction to Jefferson. I think it's a great intro track to the second act. It was just like, hey, here's kind of I wouldn't say he's the antagonist, because like everyone outside of Eliza's kind of in that gray area, or a bad guy, and so and George Washington to an extent. He like at least the way that they portray him in the show, that like, I thought it was like, oh yeah, here's the person that's gonna get in Hamilton's way for most of this second act. I really like that song. I think it's I really love the halftime bit where James Madison's talking to Jefferson, and just how how they do like the body movement, and then when Jefferson approaches him, he like uses the cane and gets towards him in tune with the music.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool. I just love that creativity there. Great song. It's probably like it's definitely in my top 5 of favorite songs, I would say, personally.
On what did I miss? There's a fun little footnote kind of fact in there from Lynn. Figuring out the sound of Thomas Jefferson was a fun challenge. My reasoning: he's a full generation older than Hamilton, and he was absent from much of the fighting during the Revolutionary War, though certainly an architect of some of the founding documents. So I wrote him in sort of a Lambert, Hendricks, Ross, Gill, Scott Heron mode. Jazzy, proto-hip-hop, but not the boom bap of Hamilton. He has just as much fun with words, but they swing and they sing. So it's kind of like, even in his stylings, and I don't have it. I don't have like the references to remember who's kind of assigned to who. But one of the things that Lynn did was he very much kind of like, for each of the characters, he kind of assigned a hip hop voice to them. Like I want to say Burr, I believe, is like Mos Def, and that's kind of like the influence for his sound. I think Oak / Hercules Mulligan, I think I think that's supposed to be Biggie. But basically, like each of them has like a flavor of hip hop that they're kind of inspired and heavily influenced by, and that's why all those characters, even though they're coming from the same voice in Lin-Manuel Miranda, like they can each sound so distinct, instead of all sounding like samey a little bit. And the idea that he put that much extra thought into Jefferson in his introduction to make him kind of sound like pre-hip hoppy a little bit, in What Did I Miss, and have a little bit more jazz and swing to that number, is another good way to kind of set him apart as a character in sound.
Yeah, definitely. God, what a musical, so good.
Yeah,
it's just pure genius. Cabinet Battle 1 and 2 are fun. I could probably say confidently that my least favorite song in the musical is Say No to This.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that one just as a whole feels off. It just feels it feels different, but not in a good way. it just everything about it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Um, and maybe that's the point, because like, hey, this is the song about when Hamilton cheats
Yeah.
on Eliza, and it, that rubs you the wrong way. Maybe that's the point, but like, just from a going into my ears, I'm like, I don't really like it.
Yeah,
And
it's
I think
it's
I also think it goes on for too long as well. But the thing that sucks about it though is that I love Jasmine Jones's voice.
mhm.
I wish she had a bigger role in the show, because she might have my favorite voice for anyone on the like in the cast.
Mhm. Yeah,
I really like it.
it's definitely the number I probably skip through the most when I'm like just
Mhm.
listening to the soundtrack. And there is absolutely an element of it that is by design of like, hey, yeah, this is the turning point for our protagonist, and he, you know, fucks up royally, and we don't want to see that, so we want to just kind of like gloss through that and be like, no, no, no. But the different flavor of it too is definitely one that like, yeah, isn't doesn't doesn't meld well for me either with so much of the rest of the numbers. Like, even like, because like you have in the first act you have something like Helpless, which the one of the like little lovely little reference points is Helpless is basically like a Ja Rule Aaliyah song kind of thing.
Yes.
That
Yes.
being the very much the flavor that he was writing for that. It's Philippa's number, but then you have Hamilton come in with a little bit of gravel, as long as I'm alive, Eliza, kind of like absolutely inspired by Ja Rule, which is adds another fun layer to the Hamilton mixtape, where when they do a remix of that song, Ja Rule comes in to play the Hamilton character. um,
Amazing.
yeah,
I haven't listened to the Hamilton mixtape yet, but I definitely plan on doing so.
yeah, definitely check it out. I think you'll get I think you'll have a lot of fun with it, and really enjoy a lot of those extra little flavors. And there's just like some of it is like just like bigger names or bigger music
Someone covering
stars
a song, but like
doing
then there's
covers of the songs. But then others are like one of my favorite tracks from it is Immigrants We Get the Job Done, which is taking that line, and then it's it's like trapcore hip hop kind of thing, like built off of that song and that idea, and they kind of do a spin on it. Or there's there's a number basically inspired by Wrote My Way Out, by that line from Hurricane. I Wrote My Way Out. That's a great number. So it's like the album is basically a weird mashup of covers, songs inspired by Hamilton, and then like the deleted scenes of Hamilton. That's fascinating, and certainly one of my favorite albums in recent years, that wasn't like a Broadway musical kind of thing. So yeah, definitely check it out, because it's got some good stuff in there. But yeah, the going back to kind of Helpless versus Say No to This, that's like I can enjoy Helpless, but then when we get to Say No to This, I'm like, this just doesn't hit my ears the right way either.
yeah. I think what it is that I think like the the genres that they're playing with in that song don't really fit the vocals, or the vice versa, and they kind of just friction with each other. It yeah, it's really hard to explain, but yeah, the best way to explain is that it rubs me the wrong way. I think Jasmine Jones is phenomenal, and I wish she had a bigger role than Peggy and Maria, because she is an incredible singer, and I love her voice. The Room Where It Happens is phenomenal. I like. I don't really care about listening to it in the car, but like, or on my computer or anything like that. But it's one of my favorite performances to watch, just
Yeah,
because Leslie, like, the choreography is great. Arguably the best in the show. And Leslie Odom just like literally gives his all in that one. And it's crazy because he has like 20 seconds until like he gets up after that song is over to like compel it, like to get himself back to normal before the next song, where he's having that conversation with Hamilton, when he finds out that Burr ran against his father-in-law
yeah,
and beat him. Yeah, like he has like 30 seconds to like get to like get breathe to
yeah.
breathe and get his air back into his system, and then go back out, and in the show, like you see him like drenched in sweat.
Yeah.
So and then when they get to the second cabinet battle, someone passes them a towel like literally on the stage, and he's just like patting himself off, like, yeah, dude, you deserve that. One last time, also similar to the room where it happens. Like I like watching it, don't really care about listening to it without the visuals in that sense.
There's another YouTube video out there of the cast of Hamilton going and performing after it blows up and everything. They perform at the White House for the Obamas, and there's a great video of Lin-Manuel and Christopher Jackson performing one last time for the Obamas, basically on their way out. That's another great one. But yeah, the performance that Christopher Jackson gives in that song is like
phenomenal,
wonderful. Yeah, phenomenal, breathtaking. And seeing like how emotional he's getting at his basically his swan song in the show, which at some point in the story was originally doubling as like Washington's funeral, and it still kind of is, since we don't see Washington in the show anymore, outside of like it as a ghostly figure kind of thing. But it was much more overt in earlier iterations of the performance. But just the way he's so clearly like emotionally moved. I commented on one of my friends on like Facebook, because they were talking about how great that he was, and somebody like hopped in and was like, yeah, you can clearly tell they recorded this in like one of his final performances. I was like, no, he stuck around with the show for another few months after this was done. He was just delivering this amazing performance every time.
Yeah, I mean, like, or at the very least, like, he knew this was going to be for the movie, so he was like, he's going to go all out. So, and in no way saying that like they don't go all out each time, but again, like I haven't seen two different versions of the show, so how with the same cast, so I wouldn't know. But at the very least, you can assume they know that they're being filmed. So
yeah. Do you are you familiar at all with In the Heights? Lin-Manuel's other show.
I know what it is. I don't really know what the story's about, and I'm not familiar with the songs.
Okay. Well, when you eventually see it, because obviously it has been made into a movie, and that was supposed to come out this year, not happened. But when it comes out eventually, the role of Benny in that, Christopher Jackson originated that role on Broadway. So just like think of like it's a very different role to Washington. It's just something that's fascinating to think about when you end up seeing it. Kind of the different flavors that Christopher Jackson has within him. Because he's a much more he's an upstart cabbie who wants to be something more. And he also is like one of the romantic, like it's basically a story of like two romantic kind of tales over a 4th of July weekend. And he's in one of them. So it's another thing that like jumps to my mind as we talk about him and just his great performance, because he talks about they were doing In the Heights when Lynn starts getting the ideas behind the Hamilton mixtape, and he's talked in interviews about like them going off stage for a moment or something, and Lynn kind of mentions it like real quick in passing, like, hey, I think I know what I'm going to do next. And then a couple days later, I think Alex Lacamoire, who's kind of the composer and worked on both shows, goes up to him and is like, hey, G-dubs, as a reference to him playing George Washington, but he hadn't like been filled in on Lynn's plans yet for it. But yeah, he was attached from like that very early stage as well to what would eventually become the show.
Are they the only two from the original cast of In the Heights that's in the original cast of Hamilton? I know the composers and the director are the same.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I don't. And then Anthony Ramos, interestingly enough, is playing the Lin-Manuel character in the film version. So that's another like little tweak there. But yeah, I believe only. I mean, I don't know. There might be ensemble crossover as well. But of the core cast of In the Heights, Chris Jackson and Lin-Manuel Miranda were the only ones that moved on into Hamilton as well.
Okay. Good to know.
Yep.
Yeah, I know him so great. I just love the part where where he's just like tear themselves to pieces. Jesus Christ, it will be fun.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Oh, and then just like the uh I assume I assume like that is it's on purpose, but just the part where like the redcoat puts the chair down for him and it's not directly behind him and he's
Oh
still
yeah.
singing, but he's like, move the chair.
Yeah. 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 He has a lot of those great
So
moments.
good.
I love the in the is it in the last number or is it in this one? I'm so blue. And the like he
Oh, yeah,
stomps the
no,
foot
yeah, that,
and the lights change.
yes. And who comes next? I'm so blue.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
Turns blue.
Yeah.
So good.
I was talking with Cam
Um,
because Cameron wanted there to be Cameron Abbott when he and I were originally discussing it. I think even before we discussed it on the podcast, he was like, "Yeah, I wish they'd done more with the lighting on the show," and I was like, "Yeah, but like." Partly like he's asking for things just because he doesn't really know theatrical lighting, but then another element is if you do too much with the lighting, then moments like that don't pop as much.
exactly.
When you have a sudden shift, a very dramatic like let's focus on the lights right now because lights is one of those things that like the background or the backdrop or a score of a movie like. It's oftentimes doing its job if you're not paying attention to what's going on. If you're not like aware of it, then that's what the lighting designer intended. It's very rare that you want like that a lighting designer is like, look at what I'm doing on this stage. Ha ha ha! Look at all this greatness.
Yeah, and I feel like that the lighting. I still like. I get where Cam's coming from, but also I think that the lighting, when it is effective, it is incredibly effective.
Mm-hmm.
Like Yorktown, basically that entire song, but definitely like with the like once the like the turntable scratching is done and then the soldiers are like posing and like there's lights on each one of them, and at the end of Yorktown when they're all like raising their arms and all that jazz, like I get where he's saying, but yeah, I agree with you, Trevor, for sure. um what else? I like Washington on Your Side. That's really cool. It's really funny too because Burr just comes out of nowhere, and then Jefferson's like, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
I guess we're allies in this. Okay. Sure. Fine.
yeah, exactly. Uh,
Which then
I think
obviously like comes back to play when getting Hamilton on their side. It's a fun role reversal moment.
yeah, exactly, and it, it it's interesting just because like they're working together, but even though that they're running against each other, so it's like even though they know that at that point they don't know that that Washington's stepping down, so that I mean that is a point to be made, but they still do like confront him after all that
Yeah, I think that's
anyway.
another.
So
I think that's another one of those moments where they take some liberties with the actual history of the moment. Like I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know if it was. I don't think it was James Madison, Burr, and Jefferson that go like confront Hamilton about it.
yeah,
At least as the drunk history episode about all of this details. James Monroe is one of the people there
okay,
instead.
of Burr.
So. Yeah, I don't know who he's there instead of, but I know he's there in that confrontation, and he seems to be the driving force behind it. And it's Lin-Manuel telling the drunk history story, so it's clearly something he knows
Yeah.
very intimately. And so I think this is just one of those things where they, for the sake of the characters they were playing around with, they kind of consolidate some of those things.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely good to know. Um, yeah, because at first I was like, I just thought about it right now. It's like, wait, why are they still working together? Because I mean, they're like, I mean, I don't know if Jefferson knew at that point also that Burr was running for president. So that's another thing that
Yeah,
that I think that
I don't think he. I mean, definitely in the context of the show, he had not he had not made his intentions known yet.
yeah. I really like the Reynolds pamphlet. I really like that song, just as a song, and I like it in the movie as well, because it just I love the parts where it's just damn,
Yeah,
just in
yeah,
the background is like it's so great, and it's just I thought it was a really well executed song for just like kind of the revelation of everything that was going on and
One
all
of
that jazz.
one of my favorite little subtle things in the show that took me like I probably listened to it I probably listened to the album hundreds of times and never caught it, and it wasn't until I was like looking at the lyrics themselves in the book. But like one of the little chorus things that's going on in Reynolds pamphlets by the end is like people being like, "At least he was honest with our money," and that is so overshadowed by everything else that's happening in that song that it's basically just a commentary on like, yeah, that was Hamilton's intent, but he completely misread what the response to this was going to be.
Yeah, like people were like, okay, who cares about the money thing? You cheated on your wife.
Yeah.
And I also like it how it's very much like it feels like Jefferson putting his thumb on his nose going nah nah to Hamilton after like you're never gonna be president now.
Yeah.
It's just like ha 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 that type of thing, and I really love that bit. It's one of my favorite like Jefferson bits
Did
in the
you
entire
so
musical.
you obviously hadn't seen Hamilton at the time, but do you watch SNL at all, or had you seen Lin-Manuel Miranda host SNL?
Bit.
So
I don't think I saw him host SNL. No.
So he famous like now almost infamously, I guess, hosted basically like in between when Trump's comments about like you can grab him by the pussy came out before the election, and so when Lin-Manuel Miranda hosted, he like riffs on that. Like he's walking down the hall with like portraits of all, you know, a whole bunch of former hosts or whatever, and he passes by the picture of Donald Trump in the hall, and he kind of like he's doing a number and he breaks into, well, you're never going to be president now, and then obviously like 2 weeks later or whatever, he was proven wrong, as you know, in the most infuriating way possible. But it was like because he's basically, I want to say in his opening monologue, he does a variation of My Shot, but he breaks out of My Shot a little bit to do, well, he's never going to be president now, in reference to Trump at the time. So
that's funny.
Yeah, definitely a monologue worth going back and like looking at as a weird like, you know, October time capsule of 2016, I guess.
Yeah. I gotta watch that for sure, because that, even though, you know, Trump's president, it would be something funny to watch for sure. Let's see here. You know, like I think I have mixed, like I really like Burn, like I really like it as a concept, and I like, I don't know, there's something that doesn't click with me with that song, and I don't know what it is, but I do still overall really like it. I really love the U parts where she just waves back and forth, which takes so much vocal capability to do that. I thought was just really, like, even when I heard the song, because that was another song that Celia would play in her car, and I remember the first time hearing that, I was just like, I didn't make a comment about it, but in my head I was like, wow, that was really cool. A really cool thing that that song does. And I do like the part where, like, she's like, you know, you forfeit a place in our bed, you know, you forfeit, like, all that stuff. Really like that moment in the song a lot as well. I think it just I think it might just, maybe it goes on for too long for me or something like that, or maybe it's, I think it gets kind of how I feel about the George Washington songs. I'm like, there are really good parts in this song, but I don't think it's consistent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because that's how I feel about Right Hand Man. Like, I think that there are some really great parts to that song, but as a whole, I'm just like, oh, it's okay. And similar to One Last Time, but to a lesser degree, I still pretty like One Last Time a lot. I just don't think it's a listen in the car type song personally.
Yeah, one last time for me in particular, it's like the extended kind of like quoting of
The
his
address.
departure speech. Yeah, his
Yeah.
address. Like it's like I don't know if we needed all of this, um, or if that could have been cut down a little bit. But like in performance, Chris Jackson is so compelling that I don't care. But when I'm
Yeah.
listening to it in the car, yeah, that's another one I probably just kind of like, next.
Yeah, for sure. And then the election of 1800 I really like a lot. Especially in the film where Burr's like as your vice president and then David David B. Diggs is like yeah, right. Like
Yeah,
uh, again, like that was like a small part, such a small part that I wish was on the original, like the original soundtrack. I just like
mm.
that interruption of him, and it was just so well done and well executed. I really liked it.
Yeah, that's one I like. I have such an appreciation for Leslie Odom Jr.'s performance in this that even when I've seen it live, you don't see everything that's going on in somebody's face when you're 300 feet back in the balcony or something like that. And so seeing his reaction to Hamilton choosing Jefferson over him is like devastating. And he's just like he nails all of the conflicting layers of what are happening in that moment. And then he immediately turns on a dime to be like, all right, well, I got to go work with this guy now. So yeah, I look forward to our partnership. And it's like he does such a great job of like compartmentalizing those two sides of what's going on in Burr right in that moment that it's one of my favorite moments in the filmed version of the show.
Yeah, I also think this song, along with there's other bits, I think because there's very little times in the musical where they're not singing and they're just speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the meaning behind that is to kind of show the gravitas behind the words, or like what they're saying, and
Yep.
so like the part where Jefferson isn't singing and he's just like, when you see Hamilton, tell him I said thank you for the endorsement. And I'm just like, that hit harder because he wasn't singing it. He was, you're used to them singing everything that they're saying, but then at that point it just drops that tone of like that heaviness
Yep.
that like it's really great. And I also love the part where, when Jefferson, gets the vote, is when they're just like, well, I'll be damned. Well, I'll be damned.
Yeah.
That part's so great. And that's the part. That's the thing that I really like about just Jefferson's, like any song that Jefferson's in, is that there's something minuscule like that's really funny and just catches me off guard. Like the first time I watched it, like my very first time, all those moments like literally made me almost have to pause the movie from because I was laughing so hard
Mm-hmm.
because it just caught me so off guard. Um, yeah, I love that. And there's another thing I was gonna say that I completely forgot. What was it? Oh,
No.
oh yeah, another like historical, like very very small, like inaccuracy, but like still true in a sense, is that like Hamilton didn't particularly have a vote, but he just more
Yeah.
influenced
Yeah.
them to side with Jefferson.
Yeah, the
And that,
historical context of that moment is basically like it went to the electoral college and they were basically at a tie among the delegates, and so like Hamilton's decision to back one candidate or another kind of like swayed some of the delegates to go for Jefferson
exactly.
instead is what that's
Yeah.
it's a lot of like super nerdy like political history to try and like condense into a song, so I get the abbreviated version of what they're doing there. But yeah,
Yeah.
it like if you don't know that, it just kind of it's like, wait, I don't understand what happened. And you have to do a little bit of digging.
And I think that just this moment in this song in general, I feel like for me, just knowing the political culture that we're in right now is the most significant, just because of like there a lot of mentality that we have nowadays is very black and white
Mm-hmm.
in the political spectrum, where like, oh, if you don't agree with me, you're on, like, if someone who leans left is like, oh, if you don't agree with me, you're like just like all the conservatives and vice versa, when that's not really the case.
Yeah.
And that, I think it's unfair that that is the case, that people see it like that way. Because no one's ever gonna, agree with everything. Like, that's just
Yeah,
being a human being.
it's the failing of a two-party system, and why,
Yeah.
like Washington even says, like, he has his reservations against the two-party system kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it has very much kind of fueled this whole like this or that mentality in this country, where yeah, very rarely are things actually black and white like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so when it comes to just Hamilton deciding, even though I don't agree with Jefferson like on anything, he at least speaks his mind, he speaks his beliefs. And it's just, I just think that would be a really interesting experiment to see how like society would react to that now.
Mhm.
Like, if
I mean,
you
it's
know,
like
like
it's
if
like
you just
Mitt
ask,
Romney coming out and being like, "Hey, I think Trump is crazy," which he's doing to his credit, despite like everybody else in his party kind of just stepping in line. It's like that's one of the modern day analogs, I would say, is like Mitt Romney kind of jumping out and being like, "Hey, I." Like, whether or not he's going to vote for Biden, I don't know, but you have people on the Republican side of the spectrum saying like, I'm going to vote for Biden because I completely disagree with what he says, but at least he's not Trump. In that manner.
To a certain degree, like, yeah. But if you were just like, hey, would you want, I don't want to go somewhere like as extreme as Trump, but would you want someone who is like a more traditional Republican? Not because Trump is definitely not a traditional Republican.
Yeah.
Uh, or would you want someone who is neutral on almost all things and doesn't really have certain, like, really any ideas on
Mm-hmm.
legislation that they want to work on as president? Like, that's kind of a hard choice. Like, you know what I mean? And
I mean, well, that's almost effectively how we got Trump. It seems, is because like Trump didn't really have any stances on any kind of any of the political, like in his campaigning in 2016, he wasn't really taking hard stances on anything. He's very much like wavered on a whole number of topics, but like they were like, well, let's go with him because he's charismatic. He's almost the Aaron Burr of the story, basically, and it worked in that favor versus people like Jeb Bush or something like that, who had track records and the things that they kind of stood behind. So it is the weird like populism kind of approach to it's that whole like he's the guy you would want to have a beer with.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you say that because Burr was technically like a part of the Federalist Party, right? And then he switched to the Democratic Republican so he could run for president. And
well, for the Senate seat first, but yeah, then president.
For the Senate seat, and then later for president. So and then even though he didn't have those ideals, that's wild. Oh my God, damn it, we elected Aaron Burr.
Yep, we elected Aaron Burr, and turns out
probably a much more extreme Aaron Burr, but we elected an Aaron Burr.
Yep, I mean, like Andrew Jackson is the probably the much better analog because of the populist nature. Yeah. But yeah, it's effectively like it's a lot of the same things that like Aaron Burr is painted as a villain of in this show apply to Trump in the 2015-2016 primaries, where he wasn't really like he was saying whatever the people wanted to hear rather than like having any kind of like actual track record of political stances and opinions.
Yeah, I'm actually curious because I didn't really do much on like research on Aaron Burr, like when it came to his personality, like because you can be like neutral with your like your political views, but you could still be like a nice person. So I don't know, because I feel like that Aaron Burr at the end of the day meant well, like at least in the way that I got the message from the musical.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was the case historically. That's more what I'm trying to go for.
Yeah, and
Trump was more like, hey, let's
yeah.
let's be assholes for no reason, and like everyone's like, yeah, assholes.
Yeah, Logan or Cam can speak definitely better to like the real life Aaron Burr than I can. But I know they've both mentioned that like, and Lin-Manuel Miranda has even come out and said that like if they were to do like a sequel to Hamilton, it would be basically about like the next part of Aaron Burr's life after the duel, where like he goes off the deep end. He's like, while he's still vice president, I think he's like charged with treason or considered like to be treasonous because he's trying to, give parts of the country back to Britain or something like that. Like he definitely has a super crazy post Hamilton part of his life
breakdown. For sure.
That
yeah, he fled the country at a point and then came back, and
But yeah, I don't know enough about the ins and outs to speak really distinctly on it.
Interesting. Okay. And then other songs, because we're getting near the end here. Like It's Quiet Uptown. Like, are you kidding me? Like, amazing, absolutely amazing. Just like the part where the part that really gets me, is, oh, I forgot the actual lyrics, but it's something that Eliza says a lot throughout the oh yeah. Oh gosh, what is the first line? It's like he's like, I know who I married. Like basically what Eliza says to Hamilton. I forgot when she says it, but it's basically like, I know the person who you are, even though people might see a different you. Like, I know deep down who you are, and like
So what was it? I'm not afraid. I know who I married.
I'm not afraid. Yeah, like even though like, after everything that happened, which I think at that point she kind of moved on, but like she is obviously feels that Hamilton is at fault for Philip's death, because he basically encouraged him to duel someone, which I don't understand. I don't care that this was like 300 years ago. How does that make sense?
Well, hey,
this might be the last time I see you. Are you not like? Come on, or what?
The norms of dueling at that time, and what especially in the time between like the 10 duel commandments and Philip's duel, is that the norms had very much shifted into like it is a thing of like decency that like we won't actually shoot each other. We will aim our pistol at the sky, but you were willing to die over this grievance that we've had with one another, so I will respect that you have that grievance and we will move forward. So like like most duels did not end in death. Most duels were like it was like the formality of the thing was what you would go and say, like you would it's that whole like the stereotypical like slapping a glove or whatever. It's like there was a whole like procedure and routine to this, that like so that's what like Hamilton is saying to Philip when Philip's like, I don't want him to shoot me, Dad. Like, you're telling me to point my gun at the sky. I don't want him to die. And Hamilton saying like, no, like a man of honor does not take another man's life. That's not something we would do, especially not in war, like when you're not in wartime or something like that. So like that's and the even going into his own duel at the end of the show, like it's he is a man of honor with the respect of the rules of dueling. So like it's of course it's assumed that he's going to aim his pistol at the sky, and fire kind of the absentee shot or whatever. But obviously George Eaker did not necessarily get that memo, and Burr kind of, as we see at the end, acts very impulsively in that moment, out of maybe fear as much as anything else. Yeah,
and that bit, like that whole bit with Leslie Odom is just absolutely phenomenal. Just I just the part where he was just like the history books will say like that Hamilton like was wearing glasses, and he's like why, and he like yelling like, if not to take deadly aim, it's him or me, like that part like
Yeah.
really got me.
Yeah. This man will not make an orphan of my daughter. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful moment because it's absolutely justifying. Like, he's seeing all this thing. This is how he's processing all this information.
Yeah.
He thinks he's at death's doorstep. He knows he's not a good shot. So like, he's screwed if Hamilton actually showed up to fight today.
Yeah. He had the mentality that if Hamilton were to show up, he would die.
Yeah.
And even then, just like him thinking specifically like, I will not let my daughter be fatherless, like, you know what I mean? Or no, I'm pretty sure or like, yeah, literally an orphan. I'm pretty sure at that point Theodosia died.
Theodosia died. Theodosia Senior, I guess. The mom had died, and so it's very much.
I don't think that. Did they ever actually mention that in the musical? I think they did. Where?
I don't believe so. It's another one. There's like a
one-liner thingy.
Maybe. I don't think they do. It's another thing. There's cut lyrics from other songs that make mention of it. But yes, by this point, Theodosia had passed, and then his daughter Theodosia also dies like Philip before he does. So there's like a bittersweet tragedy to the song Dear Theodosia, where they're both singing to their children that they hope will outlive them, and they hope they're building a better world for them, but they both die. They both outlive their children.
Yeah. Oh dang, that I didn't even think about that. How does his daughter die?
I think just an illness.
It's an illness, right? Yeah. Okay. I think I remember reading something about that. Okay. Cool. Not cool, but like, the more you know, the more you know. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the ending's great too. I think. Oh, like one thing I want to mention, because I wasn't a big fan of the song, that led up to the duel with Philip and George. I loved the usage of the turntable when he got shot, and just like the slow motion of it all, really well done. In that sense, for sure. And then
even that again, going to like George Eaker, like not playing by the rules because he shoots at like 7 or 8 or something like that, like instead of waiting for
he shoots at 7. Yeah. So which makes me like, I actually need to do like research on like what happens to him after. I feel like I don't know. I feel like it just him like shooting Hamilton's kid, and then he's just gone for the rest of the story. I just kind of want to know what he does after.
Yeah.
That type of thing. I'm trying to think about the
everything was legal in New Jersey though, so
everything's legal in New Jersey. But the part where where Eliza shows up to the doctor or whatever, and I forgot the actual lyrics, but there's a specific line of lyrics that she does, and just how the music swells with it was just a really I really enjoyed, just from a musical aspect. I'm trying to see it
real quick. I just pulled it up. Eaker died a few years later after shooting Philip of consumption or tuberculosis. So he he did not have like a good long life after killing Philip. But yeah, he's pretty like unremarkable. He'd been in a duel the day before against somebody else too, though. So it's like he was a dueling fiend there for a couple days, and then killed Philip, and then died a few years later of TB.
Yeah, it's the part where she's just like, I'm not gonna sing it because I'm gonna sing it terribly, but the part where she's like, "Who did this, Alexander? Did you know?" And it just kind of like crescendos into that, and then Philip just immediately it's like, "Mom, I'm so sorry for forgetting what you taught me," and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Dude, man, that chills right now, chills.
Yeah. And
So good.
and the fact that it's that his whole like his song that he's been doing is Un Deux Trois is the 10 dual commandments. It's that like that refrain.
Yeah, that God, it man, there's just so much to this musical. It's I don't I can't like I can't imagine.
You're only 8 times in. You're barely scratching the surface on this thing.
I know, exactly. I can't even imagine another musical coming out in my lifetime that will be better than this. Like I legitimately can't.
I mean, yeah, it's very much
it's
like
so good.
a once in a generation kind of thing.
100%.
It was like before this, like Rent was like the other one that like broke into the mainstream culture to this extent, and even Rent, I think, can't hold a candle to Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly. And just the part where like shout out to Anthony like Ramos. Like I didn't really like care for his him as Lawrence, but like this specific scene where he's on his deathbed, like so powerful. Especially the part where he's like I did exactly what you said, Pa. I held my head up high. Like even before we got to 10, I was aiming for the sky. I'm like
yeah.
Do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it just gets even worse, because when Eliza shows up too, and it's just like, man, and just the part like the like one part of the entire uh musical where there's like literally no sound is when Eliza screams and cries, and I'm just like, oh man, this like just masterful, like, oh my god.
Yeah, you mentioned I wanted to touch on that a little bit because you mentioned earlier that like obviously Eliza you think is it bounces back between this is Aaron Burr's, this is Hamilton's, this is Eliza's story, and Eliza has for me two of the very most powerful moments in the show, one being that just guttural scream, and talking with Cameron Abbott in particular, who he every time he listens to Burn, he just is a sobbing mess, but he didn't cry when he saw it performed. Like the juxtaposition of actually seeing her perform it didn't like trigger whatever usually caused him to cry, but he like lost it in the scream there. And then also like one of my now favorite moments is her reaction at the end of the show.
Yeah, the ambiguous gasp at the end of the show.
And I want to kind of ask you what your interpretation of that moment is.
Man, it is like I don't know, man. I still don't know. I'm just and I think that's kind of like the genius behind it. I think it's just a more of I think that maybe it's a feeling of, especially knowing that Eliza, much like most people at that time, was a Christian woman, that maybe it was just more of a sense of like her sensing just Hamilton watching over her, like watching, like just looking down on her.
Okay.
I feel like that is definitely one way of looking at it. I know they don't really go into religion at all for the most part during throughout the musical.
Yeah, I mean one of the biggest moments is Hamilton basically like during It's Quiet Uptown. I make a sign of the cross at the door that didn't used to happen before. Being exactly. A thing. He was very much kind of a like in historical context he couldn't really like reconcile being a man of God versus being a like the realities of the world around him kind of thing.
Yeah, and so I think like that bit where, so like I remember the first time I watched it and I saw that I saw Hamilton walking up to Eliza, and then like he just passes behind her, and I like that hit me for that 1 second. I was like, oh man. But then like she walks back and then sees him, and then I think it's yeah, I think it's just I think it's kind of like an out of care. It's still Eliza, but like it's more of a because she kind of she's summarizing what she did
Mm-hmm.
throughout the rest of her life, and I feel like that it might be it could be many things. I think that it could be like again just her just being looked down on in Hamilton, like her feeling him, like feeling him in a like spiritual aspect and a religious aspect of that. I could also see it of like her death and just seeing Hamilton on the other side, similar to what
Yep.
Hamilton said
Mm-hmm.
when during the duel, like I see my mother on the other side, I see Philip on the other side, I see George Washington on the other side, like those type of things, because I feel because a way to while I'm thinking about it, because this is the first time I've actually kind of been put on the spot to think about what the ending means.
Yeah.
I've tried to refrain from thinking about it because I don't know, and I don't think I'm not a smart enough person to fully understand, even though like Lynn has said on record that it's kind of whatever that person playing Eliza thinks.
Yeah, I think it is absolutely like intentionally left open to interpretation.
But I think a good way that for me to think about it is that again, she summarizes what she does with her life. She's on her deathbed. She sees Hamilton, she sees Philip on the other side, and she's just happy and emotional to see them. That's kind of how I see it.
Cool. So my interpretation that I having seen
if I had to say like this is what I think.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And mine is coming. I did not have this interpretation until I saw this version for the first time last week. So I'd seen it before. I know the show very. I like to think I know the show very well. Obviously, like the gasp is not like on the soundtrack, so you don't like know that it's there necessarily. But having previously seen this show a couple times, it wasn't until this time where I looked at that moment and I was like, my read of it is after, as you kind of touch on, after Eliza has gone through and told us, the audience, just how much she has done to try and like further this man's legacy. But hearkening back to what Angelica said earlier, is like every other founding father story gets told until Hamilton, like he'd been largely forgotten to time in comparison to like the other founding fathers. And so for me, that gasp is almost a meta moment where the character Eliza sees past the fourth wall and sees the audience like seeing Hamilton's story, and she's overwhelmed by the fact that like people are finally hearing about him and finally knowing who this man was. And
like Eliza, like the person playing Eliza is now playing like Eliza, who is looking on the other side.
Yeah.
And seeing that Hamilton's story is being told in a big way.
Yeah. So that's how I read it. And
chills right now.
Yeah.
Chills.
And that's like I like that hit me the first time. I was like, oh my God, that like if that's what's going on, that is like so profound into like, again, all we're getting like from a very vocal like performance is just a gasp. And she's clearly got like some emotion going on in her face, but if that's what's like going on in her mind, that's at least what I can read into that moment now. And so that's kind of how I see it now. And that's, but I think it is like one of my favorite things about art like this is that elements like that are left open to interpretation. Yes, I'm sure Lin, even if he's going out there and saying like it's up to whoever wants to do it, like he has an idea of what the final image of the show means. You don't put that many years of your life into a thing without having some kind of idea. In the same way that like the guy behind The Sopranos knows exactly what happens during the moment that the blackout happens at the end of that episode. Like he has an idea of what's going on, what the next moment is in that world, even if you're leaving it open to the audience for conversation.
And I very much think that your theory, it backs up the idea that at the end of the day, this is for Eliza.
Mm-hmm.
This is about Eliza. So I very much am 100% like that is a great theory. And
take that, discuss it with Celia, and just
enjoy
all the philosophical conversations you can have now with that.
Well, yeah. Once we get off the podcast, I'll tell her, and then she can tell you what she thinks about it.
Nice.
Because that's really interesting. But I definitely think that even if there isn't a definitive meaning behind it, that we're I think we're both on the right track here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like I mean I love your interpretation as well of this idea that it is kind of that end moment for Eliza's life, because as you kind of say, like that song effectively spans the rest of Eliza's life. Like she's telling us all these other things she did in her life. She's bragging about this orphanage that she did late in her life. Or not, I guess not late in her life, but like all of the things she's done that carried out through her life.
She died at 97 years old. She lived a long life for that time, and extremely long life in general. Like
let alone at that time.
I hope I live that long. Are you kidding me? Like,
going back to like Hamilton's comments in one of the earlier songs, like never thinking past tomorrow, because people didn't live that long, especially in a time of revolution. So yeah, the fact that like that easily could be 97-year-old Eliza at the end of that song, seeing Hamilton and Philip and Angelica all on the other side and being overwhelmed by emotion as well. Absolutely, also a viable option and interpretation of that scene. And I feel as almost as personally moving, really.
I feel that way more so because she's looking upwards, and that very much like when people think of heaven and the other side, they think they look up,
and versus like for my interpretation, I actively have her looking at the balcony and seeing like a auditorium filled with people in my mind. So yeah, it's looking up in a spiritual sense, or looking up in a playing to the rafters kind of sense, in the very physical theatrical space.
Yeah, I think that if she was like looking around, like if she wasn't just if she was less static with her of where she was looking, I think that I think I would be like, oh, that's absolutely like what this means, what you're saying. But with her just looking up, like I'm not saying that yours is completely out, like yours is still like your theory is absolutely very very much so like one of the best I've heard. And even not saying I haven't heard I've heard a lot, but did Logan and Cam give their theories?
No, we did. I mean, like we didn't discuss it as much. I think I mentioned it in Logan's episode, and I think I mentioned it personally to Cam, kind of off mic. In how we were discussing, but I don't think we definitely have not delved into it as deeply as my conversation with you here.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yours is that. Like honestly, I think yours is more right than mine, but I think that both are. And the thing is, like, it can mean numerous things. You know what I mean? And so for me now, thinking, because I think both of ours are completely valid and possible. That that's I think of what I think and what you think at the same time now. Like and it makes me want to rewatch the entire Hamilton again and just be like, and kind of have this mindset so that when we get to the end of the show, like. How do I feel? And I think that's that speaks volumes to the production as a whole, that one small thing could make you want to have to reanalyze the entire play,
Mm-hmm.
or the entire musical, to try and see if you think that mentality is not particularly right, but a possibility.
Oh yeah, I think again, I think this show is very much a show that can grow and change with a person,
Mm-hmm.
especially like if I think of it in the context of the millions of children who watched the show for the first time, a week ago, and that will grow
Oh yeah.
up with this show, like
Oh yeah.
in the same way that like I can go back and watch a Disney movie that I watched like hundreds of times as a kid, and I can watch it now with like the lens of an adult and like all of my life experiences, and get completely new meanings out of certain moments and stuff like that. I think Hamilton
Yeah.
is completely rife with that kind of thing. People will get more out of it. Like when if I have kids, I will absolutely look at Dear Theodosia in a completely different light. Or Stay Alive, and the reprise of Stay Alive in a completely different light. I can't. It's not that I can't like imagine what I would think of those things now, and I can put myself in the shoes of those characters. But like the actual life experience of holding a kid in my arms is going to drastically change how I come at Dear Theodosia someday.
Oh yeah, for sure. I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, no, I get, yeah, totally agree, because like for example, my favorite movie of all time is Toy Story, and it's been like that like basically my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big reason to that, and I can compare this similarly to Pokemon Crystal, as well, is that uh the way I think that I think it's more impressive. I think the most impressive thing that a media can do, whether it be film, games, television, whatever, when it comes to a narrative perspective, is do something or tell a story in a way, regardless of the simplicities or the intricacies, that that basically anyone above the age of 5, that can actually somewhat use critical analysis skills to a certain degree, can understand, like uh Toy Story, what there was a lot of depth that film had, that as a kid I understood, and began to understood more and more and more as I progressed. And like, in Pokemon Crystal, like, it's my second favorite game to this day, and a big reason to that reasoning is because like I thought that the like Silver, the rival's story was incredibly compelling, but and it was told very simplistically in a way that I could understand. It was very much it was like the first ever, for me, it was like the first ever redemption arc I've ever seen. Like, you know, it's like a bad, like, this guy's my rival and he's a bad guy, and he turns good. He learns how to take care of his Pokemon, and like, and that just like the simplicities of that I think is really compelling.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I find the most impressive when it comes to these type of narratives. So like, when there is so much there for you to dive in on with Hamilton, but like it is also very much, you can get a full experience of the show, like, I think in a narrative sense, at from a very young age. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like yeah, like all the stuff that we're talking about is like, I feel
I mean,
that
like
only
that's
people.
been Pixar's bread and butter. Really, has been like
Yeah.
telling a story that works for all ages. Is that like you're telling stories that the kids can like appreciate and get something out of, that isn't just like something shiny that they're watching for a couple hours. It's their
Hmm.
like modern Disney, I think, is doing that as well, with some of the
Yeah.
Frozen stuff and Zootopia especially.
Yeah, like Zootopia for me is like, in my opinion, the best like Disney, like animated Disney film
Mhm.
since I can't even say, probably like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
I think Zootopia is an incredibly important film.
Like kids
And
don't have the world experience to know that it is entirely an allegory for race relations.
racism, yeah, exactly.
But like they see what the issues happening, and they see that it's bad, and when they grow up and can look at it through like our eyes or something like that, they will
Yeah.
absolutely see the same thing that we see.
exactly. And I think that there, again, there's just so much there that in Hamilton that no, people like us who are very much into musicals and all that jazz could talk literally all day about every little thing, but for those that are just wanting to sit down and listen to some music and see some nice choreography, um, you know they can do that, and then they will have an equally as good time as we do,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Uh, I'm just
so that's
realizing
great.
kids are going to learn counting to 10 on
And
the 10 dual commandments.
yeah,
And then in French Stay Alive or
stay
whatever
alive,
his
yeah, stay alive.
no, because he says it in Stay Alive, but it's a reprise of the sequence in Philippa's
Oh
song,
man,
like
yeah, I know what
Come
you're
Away
talking
for the
about.
Summer or whatever that number is.
Oh, take a break, take a break.
Yes, yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
So yeah, like realizing that kids are gonna like learn that, and especially like with the added layer of context of 10 dual commandments is inspired heavily by the 10 crack commandments. It's just like, yep, there's so many extra layers that those kids are not at all going to understand right now, but they're still taking something away from the show. So yeah,
absolutely.
I
Um,
at the risk of leading us down another 3 hour
and
conversation,
and let's
I was gonna say, like, how do you how do you how do you tie your idea of like, oh, great art is something that even like a 5-year-old can understand with like what Kingdom Hearts has turned into, Cam?
that seems like a totally different thing. Well, if you want to talk about a retrospect on Kingdom Hearts another time, I
Yeah,
will gladly come on with that. But I'm not gonna take any Kingdom Hearts slander.
not gonna take the bait on that one. And that's like
No,
I
I'm
was
not.
like, we can't get out of this without you having a Kingdom Hearts nod at least, given your deep love for that series and
No,
representation
yeah,
of it everywhere I've seen. I'm not
no,
gonna
yeah,
let you. I'm not gonna let you go on
you.
beyond and talk about Kingdom Hearts and not come and talk about Kingdom Hearts on a That Nerdy Site
Well,
show.
I will say simply enough. Why a big reason, like the biggest reason why I love Kingdom Hearts is that I think that Kingdom Hearts, the messaging that game portrays, especially in the first game, especially in the second game, specifically those two games. Um, Basically, when I was a kid, I was like I had temper tantrums, I threw fits, I like I had a lot of anger, and Kingdom Hearts was definitely that game that um, showed me a way to like rebuild myself as a person, especially with Riku in his specific redemption arc. How he had to come from like darkness and come to terms with it in that sense. Um, and yeah, like in the sense of like, no, I'm not going to expel the darkness. I'm more going to overcome it. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
and that's why he's my favorite video game character to this day. Uh, is that like I can just really relate to his character, and I think that the message, like Kingdom Hearts, just at the end of the day, just brings very positive messages of like light overcoming darkness, and just being always being there for your friends, always being there to help when it is called, and just like general like life lessons that I think that everyone should like have. Just be kind to one another. Like I don't like confliction. Like I don't like arguing about like things that I don't feel the need to be like has to be like argued, like a very like petty or like I don't want to use petty, but unnecessary confrontation. I just don't like that, and I think in Kingdom Hearts I think also exemplifies that a lot. And just trying to be a good person, and some like sometimes no matter how good you try to be, like you will make mistakes, and you will get back on your feet, like, those who are your friends will be there for you, during your moments of weakness, and always be there for you. Kind of, again, it's kind of similar to Sora and Riku's relationship in the first two games. And yeah, those are like the big factors that make me really connect to Kingdom Hearts. Outside of that, the gameplay is great most of the time, and the story is super. And I think the story is really fascinating. It's told in a very Japanese way, more than most video games. A lot of visual storytelling, a lot of analogy and metaphorical storytelling that is not for everybody. And I'm not saying that Kingdom Hearts is the perfect series. It in no way isn't. I still think Kingdom Hearts 2 is one of the greatest games of all time, and it's my favorite game of all time. I think it holds up incredibly well. Like it,
and hey,
yeah.
with Hamilton being bought, at least for distribution rights, by Disney, maybe we'll get Hamilton in Kingdom Hearts 4.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to the American Revolution.
Kingdom Hearts 4 in 2050 when when I'm retiring.
Yeah. But no. There's my little spiel for Kingdom Hearts for you, Trevor.
I look forward to, because we've talked offline. Eventually, we will have you on that Ultimate Video Game List show, and I look forward to you continuing to make your cases for Kingdom Hearts over there when we eventually bring that show back.
Yeah.
So
Kingdom Hearts 2 absolutely will be one of my five picks, 100%.
there you go.
The others, we'll see.
We'll see. You got, it's been released on enough consoles, so you got plenty of chances to get that on.
Exactly. So,
well, I think that's a good enough place as any to wrap up kind of the general conversation around Hamilton there. So let's dive into giving it a grade. Every instance of the show, we kind of grade the thing on a scale of A+ to F. So where would you put Hamilton?
To change the rules,
okay,
and give it an S.
You're giving it an S rank. Okay,
S tier. Yeah, like again, it's a product that's one in a million, like one in a generation, like you said earlier. It surpasses an A+. Like there's just it's a musical that will be discussed for years and years and years to come. Like it is, it'll be like when we have kids, I'm sure, like at least for me, the first musical I'll be like, hey, like watch this, kids. It's gonna be Hamilton, and I'm sure you have probably much more of a catalog under your belt to show your kids, being a much more of a theater person than I am. But for me, I'm just like, hey, watch this, and then like they'll enjoy it, and then once they get a little bit older, I'll be like, watch this. And
it's
then,
all
like,
downhill from here.
Yeah, and actually have a discussion with them, like, so what do you think of this? And there's like so much to talk about. So yeah, I would give it an S.
All right. Breaking the rule. Last week, Cam broke the rules with giving it an A++. Now you're giving it an S. That's fine. The rules mean nothing anyway. I'll go ahead and echo your S rank, because yes, it is the best of the best in terms of movie musicals.
Absolutely.
Diving into a little bit of extra credits, some other suggestions that Disney Plus makes if you like this. As I said, like previously in the previous episodes I've recorded this, it gave its usual, like, here are 8 suggestions based off of this, but currently it is now really only giving the one suggestion of The Undefeated presents Hamilton in Depth, which, as I alluded to earlier in the show, is basically an interview in this like Zoom call era of interviews with the cast, many members of the cast. I think pretty much all the principals except for Jonathan Groff, kind of weighing in on, it's only about 30 minutes, and weighing in on kind of the legacy of Hamilton, as well as kind of what it means in today's kind of context. So definitely check that out. Other suggestions that Disney Plus had been making are Sound of Music, Annie, Newsies Broadway musical, both the like filmed the musical version as well as the film version. music from Coco, Encore, Mary Poppins, and High School Musical, the musical, the series. And as I said, I will include a couple YouTube videos in the description here about. I'll include like the Skylar King or the Skylar Georges, and I will continue to include the Lin-Manuel Miranda performs at the White House Poetry Jam in May of 2009, and then I will also include the motif video that I discussed earlier in the episode, talking about kind of the great motifs and use of motifs in Hamilton. Outside of Hamilton, you watch anything else on Disney Plus these days, Cam?
I just started watching DuckTales, the new DuckTales.
DuckTales.
I've heard enough good things about it where I'm just like, all right, let's give it a shot. And
Yeah.
I've only watched a first few episodes.
Lin-Manuel Miranda will make an appearance at some point if he has not.
Yeah,
already.
I heard about that. And I think the thing that attracted to me the most was because David Tennant is Scrooge,
Yep.
and David Tennant is my favorite Doctor in Doctor Who.
Okay.
So that was the big selling point for me to give it a shot. And then I heard basically nothing but good things about it. So I started watching that a little bit myself. Outside of that, I mean, I'm just waiting for the second season of High School Musical, the musical, the series. That show is so good.
Yep. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I need to do when we get out of this like Hamilton era of that D Plus show. I still need to do an episode dedicated to DuckTales, the new series, because I've got a couple people that have reached out to do that. So I will be in touch with you if you want to if you want to maybe be on that as well. And then also High School Musical, the musical, the series. I have not done an episode dedicated to that yet, but I have a few people in mind that I want to bring on for that. So I will keep you in mind for both of those chats. Because they're all real good. Sweet. So that's going to do it for this week's episode. Our longest, easily, of that D Plus show, and one of our longest, if not our longest, episode of anything on that nerdy site so far here at 3+ hours. Thank you, Cam, for joining me. You can follow Cam at the Cinephile Guy. Anything out there in the world you want to plug, Cam?
I was recently on IGN Beyond. I don't know the episode number, so I apologize. I can't do that one specifically right now. But if you just check IGN, and if you're reading this coming out this week, it would be either the current episode or the previous episode. It is, So
I'll be sure to include it in the description for the episode as well.
It'll be in the description. I'll send the link to Trevor, and everything will be sorted out on that end. Outside of that, you can follow my writing at DualShockers.com, and you can follow DualShockers at DualShockers. And I stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/thecinephile guy. I'm currently playing through the Paper Mario series. I'm currently on Paper Mario Color Splash.
Cool. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter, and you can follow everything from That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site. If you'd like to be part of the show, you can go to thatnerdysite.com/D+guest and let me know what Disney Plus offering you'd like to chat about, or just hit me up on Twitter, especially if you want to be involved in these Hamilton episodes, because I'm enjoying these conversations and just picking people's brains about Hamilton. If you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, and all that good stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always help support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other. Class dismissed.